All right, everybody. Welcome to, I think this is episode...
special edition.
Special edition. A very special, this Friday, a very special episode of
Yep.
Radio Free Torna. Today, we are talking about the events in Israel with regards to the big attack by Hamas, the Israeli response, and but I also wanted to look at... I think we'll talk about the military aspects a little bit of, but I really wanted to focus in on what I saw as the rise of anti-Semitism or open acknowledgments of people's own anti-Semitism within the West, as like I say, the Democratic Socialists of America organized rallies in support of Hamas in the United States while the attack was still going on. The day after the attack, there was a number of pro-Hamas demonstrations in basically every major city in Canada.
Every major city in the Western world, it seemed.
Yeah. And so, and I found this personally kind of concerning. So I wanted to kind of focus on that a little bit. But yeah, let's maybe we start at the beginning of the what I'm calling the second Yom Kippur War.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick question on that? Like in your invitation to us on that, you mentioned that it was kind of breaking down along kind of anticipated ideological lines. Could you I haven't really been following that, so I'm going to ask you to elaborate on that.
Well, like you say, the conservative movement in North America and the United States has generally always been pro-Israel. Mm-hmm. So it's expected that the right in North America would support Israel, and generally they have. Mm-hmm. Now,
I think there's a huge point of order to be made on that, depending on, again, our definition of right.
Or let's say Republicans, Democrats. Could you say that? Would that be?
Yeah, Republicans typically... Now, of course, there's the new element of the new right...
Yeah,
that's a little anti-Semitic and a little anti-foreign intervention, and they
very isolationist.
Very isolationist.
I would say the same thing on the Democratic side. The Democrats have largely, the center Democrats have always been pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, and get a lot of funding from the Jewish community.
Yeah. So,
but now it's the radical end of the Democratic Party.
Because we have what some people are calling. I've heard it. I know I've heard Matt Cotton say it, and a lot of people saying
who?
It. Continetti.
Okay, yeah.
Who at
is he Federalist or is he National Review?
No, Commentary.
Oh, okay,
Commentary, and he works at AEI. But anyway, call it it's now the ideological horseshoe. So the fringes at the ends of the horseshoe getting closer together and then starting to find more common cause with each other. So you get one side of the horseshoe is the extreme right, one side is the extreme left.
So at the top of the horseshoe are the Republicans and the Democrats, but at the bottom of the horseshoe, the Republicans and Democrats, the extreme are coming together, or is that
at the center?
Or do I have it the opposite?
Yeah, I think you have it opposite.
The extremes.
So the Republicans and Democrats are meeting at the base of the U, right?
Which is the moderates.
Yeah, that's the moderates, right? So the ideological line would say would be bisect the horseshoe in half. Mm-hmm. One side is mainstream Republicans, one side is mainstream Democrats, and as you get out to the ends, to the tips of the horseshoe, that's where the fringe movements are. And as the horseshoe curves back in towards itself, right. That's why it's the ideological horseshoe.
Okay.
So anyway, So yes, there are elements on the right. So the support for Israel is not as strong as the right as it has been, but even the the most extreme people on the right who are still making more of the libertarian, non-foreign interventionist, isolationist argument. They're not making the anti-Semitic argument that the left is, the hard left is making.
Okay, so
what's the name of that guy who used to be on Fox? He got fired, and now he's bigger than ever, doing his own.
Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, the Tucker Carlson.
Yeah,
school.
he's on
the isolationist side.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
He's saying America shouldn't be involved in anything.
Right.
So this is one that I saw the same thing in the way that the message was sent out to us, Patty, and along the quote unquote expected ideological lines. And so that put a flag up for me, right? And that's why I spoke up quickly. Listen, anti-Semitism. I mean, the right isn't all about supporting Israel, and here I mean, this is where we start to get into one of the differentiations going to come up in at least one other form throughout this conversation, which is difference between Israel and Jewish people, right? So the attitude towards those two things, the perception of those two things on the right, those can be two different concepts, right? But so my starting point with this, and using the example that brought up the concern with you, that you obviously find distasteful for a reason, I get it, right? So I'd like to parse out what anti-Semitism means in the context of this statement that was made even as the attacks were going on, right? So, because I do not believe that, I'll open by saying the attacks by Hamas were abhorrent and are not to be supported or tolerated in any way, shape, or form. There's nothing that I'm going to say today that supports anything along those lines, right? But as we're discussing the concept of anti-Semitism in this context, is the anti-Semitism that you are labeling this, is it because they stood with Hamas? Is the anti-Semitism because there was an expressed, if not celebration, but at least, I'm not sure what it's not quite celebration, but an advocation of the attacks, right? Which, again, even themselves might not specifically, in advocating that the attacks were something to be supported, that is not necessarily directly anti-Semitic.
Can I try and summarize that in different words, and then you tell me if I've captured you?
Sure.
That being anti-Zionist,
yes,
in other words, opposed to the hegemony of the Israeli state, is not necessarily anti-Semitic. That the target, are you kind of saying that maybe, are you asking the question if the intent is the overthrow of Israeli hegemony in the region, not a hatred of Jewish people writ large?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Or even a criticism.
Or you're asking, right? Like, is that the situation?
But,
like, you're not stating that, you're saying, you're making an inquiry.
Across the board, right? I think anti-Semitism is, as a label, has to be very, very carefully used in the same way that now the label of terrorism.
It can't be a blanket catch-all.
Exactly. People throw that around. Now, again, there is no question that the acts of Hamas 8 days ago is no question that those were acts of terrorism.
Yes.
Right? But we'll get into this the context of using these words many, many times throughout this conversation.
Yeah.
So bringing it back around to Steve's original concern, is the statement by whatever labor movement, labor organization that you named, is it the statement itself simply because it was in support of Hamas? Does that make it anti-Semitic? Is that what you're talking about?
No. I will say, I think Hamas's charter, which is explicitly against the state of Israel, but it's also explicitly against Jewish people.
Oh yeah, it's a manifesto of hate.
It's a manifesto of hate, and it is anti-Semitic.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All the people who are chanting "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free,"
right,
maybe don't want to eliminate all the Jews. So that can be an anti-Israel statement, not without. Now, most American Jews and most North American Jews, I think, will say that's anti-Semitic. I think it's arguable, right? Like, okay, I'm agreeing with the point that yes, you can be anti-Israel, anti-Zionist without being anti-Jewish per se.
This is
absolutely.
And this is the defense that's usually offered in America. Well, I'm not an expert. I don't follow this super close. But it seems to me that this is the defense that's usually offered within the American internal debate, where the traditionally affiliated to the Republican side or the pro-Israel, although it is kind of bipartisan.
It is bipartisan.
The pro-Israel lobby within America has always said, you guys who are opposing this aid or support to Israel are anti-Semites. You don't want to help them because they're Jewish. Whereas the opposite side was, no. I got no problem with people being Jews. I'm not against, I'm not advocating closing down synagogues in America or anything like that. I just don't think we should be supporting Israel. And this was the counter argument, saying, like, I'm opposed to Israeli imperialism. I'm opposed to Israeli occupation of this or that or the other thing. I got no problem with the fact that they're Jews. Whereas the other side has said, no, you're a racist bastard, and you just hate Jewish people.
Yeah,
and I don't believe that's acceptable. I mean, that is shutting down the conversation unreasonably and deliberately.
Yeah,
right.
And both sides do that. Like when you talk about the whole Summer of Love, and like on the screen there we had that image from BLM's Twitter account.
Yeah.
Where unequivocally that is kind of this that with the guy with the parachute, this silhouette of the guy in the paraglider with the Palestinian flag on it. I'm sorry, man. You put that up there, I'm saying you support the attack. Like the results of. But
that's the only thing.
Just to finish on that.
Okay, go ahead.
It's used, the anti-Semitism argument is used to it's not used to defeat the anti-Israel argument. It's used to discredit it. It's used to shut it down, in the same way that when somebody said, all these riots in 2019 and 2020 were wrong and should be stopped, it was, well, you're a racist. You hate black people. It was, both sides have used this argument as a way to, well, it's not an argument, have used this slander as a way to discredit their opponent instead of actually dismantling their argument, right? So this is kind of a problem that we have in our contemporary discourse.
Well, I felt that actually for a number of years now, that you raised an interesting point for me, because I've always considered anti-Zionist as anti the existence of Israel. You put it in slightly different terms.
I think you're right. Strictly speaking, yes, and I will stand to be corrected on that. Yeah, because anti-Zionist is anti-Israel, but in today's day and age, I'm not. I think the majority of people, and I'll even say this for the majority of Arabs, understand that Israel is a permanent reality. Well, and it's not going anywhere. And Steve did mention that there are radicals from the river to the sea, eliminate the existence of it. I think the average guy on the street in the Arab world understands that, okay, Israel's still going to be there.
Yeah.
But what the problem is they still feel a need for a Palestinian statehood, that there still must be a political home for the Palestinian nation, and they don't like the concept of Israel being the local superpower who can act with, again, this is a matter of perception more than reality. Or I'm not prepared to say that this is the reality, but I am prepared to say this is absolutely the perception on the Arab street, that Israel can act with impunity, with complete disregard for its neighbors. And they don't feel that that is a situation that is tenable or should be allowed to stand. They don't feel that is just. Now, how do I express that? What label can I use for anti-Israeli hegemony? So I got lazy and I used anti-Zionist.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I think you got me thinking. Mm-hmm. I think it is actually a very accurate way of painting it. Instead of saying, let's call anti-Zionism anti the existence of the state of Israel, anti the hegemony, because that's how it's playing out in a number of ways, right?
Yeah, I think that's kind of like the modern evolution of it. In 1961, it was absolutely anti the existence of the state of Israel.
Yeah.
100%. But now, like how long has it been since 49, man? Like what, 70 years?
49 or 48?
48.
48.
Yeah, 48. It's been like 70 years.
75.
Right? So I think that even the other thing is there's a lot of people in the Arab world who understand the need for Israel. Or not need, but it suits their terms very nicely. The Gulf Arabs, like, say what you want. The Israelis are more like the Arabs than any other people on the planet. Mm-hmm. And the Arabs are more like the Israelis than any other people on the planet. They use each other as a very subtle and deniable conduit to speak to third parties. The Arabs, particularly the Gulf Arabs and the Egyptians, use Israel as a conduit to the United States. The Israelis use the Arabs as a conduit to China and the Far East. Or say to the Near East, like India, Pakistan.
Actually, for once, I push back. I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Okay.
Right. I think, Israel is enough of a player in the world that it has its own diplomatic interactions
when you want
with China
deniability.
And Russia. Okay.
Right? When you want under the table negotiations.
Well,
right?
Again, I would argue that Egypt, the Gulf states and Saudi in particular, they've got no problem dealing with the U.S. on their own.
Oh, yeah.
They don't need to go through Israel.
What I mean is, when
it's actually more the other way around.
When you're asking for understanding. Like, sometimes the Americans do stuff that the Gulf Arabs simply do not understand. Mm-hmm. Like, they don't get it. Mm-hmm. Like, why in the hell, for example, they cannot understand how the Americans flip-flop on issues. One day, you're all in favor of this, and 8 years later, you're not. This baffles the Gulf Arabs. Case in point, Afghanistan. 2005, you were all in. 2022, you walk away. What the hell? They don't understand that. Ephraim Halevi, who was a former senior commander of Israeli intelligence, wrote in his memoirs, he had a really interesting chapter on that, about how Israel and the Middle East, particularly Jordan and the Gulf states, have a very, very active sotto voce diplomatic conduit to each other.
Oh, yeah.
And that there is a lot of, like, Saudis talk a lot about how they don't like the existence of Israel and won't formally acknowledge it. But he said there is a very healthy diplomatic relationship between Jerusalem and the kingdom. Because again, for the Saudis and for the Egyptians, the existence of Israel is a very, very effective check on the power of Iran and Syria. Very powerful counterbalance that the Gulf states and the Egyptians do not want to handle on their own. For the Jordanians, they have always been the weaker of the regional Arabic powers.
Well, they've also been the most westernized and the most stable.
Right. Without the existence of Israel, say Israel never happened in 1948 and say it was still Palestine, do you think that Jordan would exist?
Probably not. No.
He probably wouldn't. No. So the Hashemite kingdom understands that Israel is a de facto guarantor of its security.
That might be a bit strong, but I get the concept.
Yeah. There's Syria or Iraq or Iran would have absolutely invaded Jordan by this time if it were not for the existence of Israel. So for the weaker Arab states, like, presumably, for the smaller guys like the Lebanese, like the Iraqis, or not the Iraqis, the Lebanese, the Jordanians, the Kuwaitis, the Gulf states, the smaller Emirates, Israel is a force of stability and enforcing the status quo. That prevents the Syrians, the Iraqis, the Iranians from, or even the Egyptians for that matter, from forcibly trying. Like, the history of the Arab world has been a struggle between Cairo, Damascus, and Baghdad for control over the entire Arab-speaking world. It has been a struggle between those three capitals.
Yeah, well, until
going back to the Mamluks,
until Mecca.
But Mecca is a religious center, but not a political. Yeah, right. It is. And the Saudis have never really had the Saudis can't even force control over the Arabian Peninsula, although they try, but they know that they can't. Yeah. The Arabs have never ever ruled themselves until the 20th century. They have always been ruled by foreign powers, be it...
With the exception of the Gulf states. Like the Arabian Peninsula was never ruled by anyone.
Oh, yeah, it was.
Yeah, they were.
The Ottomans, by extended Mongols, there to a certain extent.
By Turks, by Persians, by Europeans.
Not by Europeans.
In the 20th century, the Europeans controlled a large portion of the Arab world. Like, not the Gulf states.
Not the Gulf states. Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states, I'm speaking of in particular.
Yeah, right? But they were not ruled by Europeans.
In the First War, right, they were independent Bedouin tribes.
Well, they were ruled by the Ottomans.
The Ottomans were there, but I mean, that was... I don't know.
It was a neglectful rule, and they had a lot. Those Bedouin tribes had a lot of autonomy. Yeah, but they never had their own political control. Right?
Yeah, like the Brits had to do a lot of convincing to get the Saudi tribes. To turn against the Ottomans, right? Because they had a pretty good deal under the Ottomans, and they weren't,
they were largely left alone to do. However,
but they were still Ottoman.
They were still controlled by the Ottomans, and the deal was like, look, as long as you are a petty, poor, illiterate tribe on the fringe of starvation, we'll let you do whatever the hell you want, and that's great if you're the chieftain of that petty, poor, illiterate, barely starving tribe, because you're not starving and you're not poor. But if you are the emerging intellectual and middle class that starts to form in the 19th century.
There he goes, bringing class into it again.
You're beginning to see, like, this is a pretty raw deal, man. Like the people who emerged or who came up in these emerging urban areas and cities, they began to chafe under that Ottoman rule. And of course, this is why the Ottoman Empire never reformed after the Second World War.
Well, I think so. This is one of the reasons.
Well, yeah, but there's the European mandates.
Yeah.
What I mean is, like, after the Second World War is the first time the Arab nations have ever had real, honest to God, self-rule.
Well, and some of those were kind of artificially created. Like
this is true, but
Lebanon, Syria, Jordan.
Yep.
Kuwait, in fact. Kuwait was, in fact, and this is this is the closest I'm going to come to having any affinity with Saddam Hussein. But Kuwait actually used to be part of Iraq.
Right, sure.
And it was just kind of artificially.
But there's a very good reason why all of these people who have the same language, the same religion, and the same culture have never said, we should actually, it doesn't make sense for us to be separate. We should unify. Why don't we come together and become one super state, one united Arab homeland? There's a very good reason why this has not happened. And there's a very good reason why they didn't go back to Ankara or Istanbul and say, hey, man, why don't you guys come in and run the thing again? We kind of like the way you did it.
Well, funnily enough, you mentioned Cairo, Damascus,
and Baghdad.
Yeah. Right? Well, there was the attempt at the United Arab Republic back in the 60s and 70s.
Yes. Yep.
And obviously that didn't last.
Right.
I think by the time I found it had happened or paid attention and realized what it had been, it was already gone.
Yes.
Right. But that was those three nations.
It was also very much driven by Nasser in Egypt.
Right.
It was a unified country in the way that Yugoslavia was a unified country, which was basically a Serbian state, that had hegemony over the other constituent groups, and they chafed under that. Well, once the UAR only took place because Syria was in a position of extreme weakness at the time. And as soon as the Assad dynasty was able to reassert it, there was no interest in further subservience to Egypt at that point.
Right. So I'm going to take the opportunity right now to express that this is exactly as I foresaw this conversation going. We haven't mentioned Hamas or Israel in 15 minutes.
But we got to set the tone, right? You got to set the table.
Because this is such a layered complex. Bringing it back to the events. The events were horrific, shouldn't have occurred. Hamas, I don't think we're stating that Hamas is in any way a positive thing.
No,
right?
We're not.
Or an acceptable thing.
But you can't analyze something without knowing why it happened.
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to do here.
But even that's going to be difficult, right? I mean, there are so many. Basically, this is just the literal generations upon generations going back as far as you choose. Now we're going back to at least 1840 or 1948.
Yep.
and the Holocaust.
Yep.
But I mean, there were already people, Jewish people in Palestine.
Yes, there already were. Yes.
Setting up kibbutzim.
Yep.
And that was a source of tension. And
yeah, and it was. Yeah, it definitely was.
The huge irony is, of course, that it was the horrific events of the Holocaust
that kickstarted
that allowed for the rest of the world to band together and give rise to the existence of the state of Israel.
I want to just put a plug in here for Darryl Cooper's MartyrMade podcast in his first 6 or 7 episodes, which is about 20 hours of podcasting on the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict leading up to the formation of Israel. So it's not to say it's very balanced, and it's not to say that Palestinians don't have any historical grievances here. Or
and Palestinian Arabs. That is critical,
but it's
to be able to maintain. Now,
it's important to know. I just want to lay some context. It is important to know that the Zionist movement started in the late 19th century.
Yep.
One of the leaders of the Zionist movement was personal assistant to the Prime Minister of Great Britain, which is important because Britain ended up governing a lot of that area for the better part of 40 years.
But they also abstained from the vote for the creation of Israel.
They did. He was, I think, dead by that point. But
but I'm just saying the United Kingdom.
Yeah, the United Kingdom did. But
the British and the Israelis don't have the greatest relationship after that whole King David Hotel thing.
No, they're pretty annoyed. But so throughout the history of like, especially the interwar period of Palestine. The Jewish immigration started kind of pretty heavy, a little bit before the First World War, and then increased after the First World War.
It really kicked in the 20s and 30s.
Yeah, it really did. And Palestinians, or Palestinian Arabs, I guess, because Palestinians is kind of an artificial creation. But anyway, the Arabs kind of started to see how this demographic thing was going, and they weren't happy about it.
Yeah, and they made those concerns very clear to the British.
Yes, they did. They even went, like, groups of Arab leaders went to the UK to protest and appeal directly to the Prime Minister and to Parliament, and they were basically all their complaints fell on deaf ears.
Well, and there was some attempt by the British to restrict immigration.
There was
some attempt,
but after the
Second World War,
but the Balfour, but even after the Balfour Declaration at the end of the First World War, they had a lot of issues. So there was, then there was the 1936 Arab uprising, was put down pretty brutally by the Brits. Like when I learned some of the things that happened, I'm like, oh, so that's where Hussein got that idea. Like. One of the key units, and there's multiple units, one of the key units putting it down was the Ulster Regiment. And if you took a pot shot at the Ulster Regiment, they went to the nearest village, demolished houses, like evacuated families out of the houses, blew up the houses, and then gave the families the bills for the explosives. They did all kinds of crazy shit like that, right?
Those Northern Ireland, they're rough people. Look. This is Northern Ireland, people. Look what they do to themselves.
Well, but this brings up the black and tan.
And the other thing is
they're not afraid of violence.
There were Jewish uprisings at the same time, like some of the Jewish armed groups uprising sometimes. And it always seemed to work out that every time the Arabs rose up in some form of violence, they were put down harder than the Jews. And there was always some reason, whether it was political interference in Europe or some other reason, that when the Jews, when the mandates were putting down Jewish uprisings, they never got put down as hard as the Palestinians did. And the Palestinians saw that. So it's not, like I say, they have historical grievances that are valid.
Yes.
And, and they saw what they saw as their homeland for the last couple thousand years.
Yep. Both sides have a claim to that territory.
Yeah.
And and
if you go a couple thousand years before that to when the Jews fled Israel, right? Yeah. They kind of went on a campaign of ethnic cleansing to make that their homeland anyway, to get basically clear out the remnants, I guess, of the Assyrian Empire, right? If you want to go, 7,000 years,
we don't want to go back that far because now it's like, okay, Now we're tearing down statues of Julius Caesar in Rome because he was a pretty sadistic.
But this is what this is the reality of where we're at.
And it is so complicated
within our domestic politics.
And it's that complication that needs to be kept in the background to everything we discuss about what's going on.
Like it touches in like our discussion last week. What makes someone indigenous?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the reality of the Middle East is the legitimacy of both sides' claim. I don't think you can say one guy's claim is more legitimate than the other.
Well, and again, this gets tricky. So if we're going back to whenever it was that the Jewish diaspora was created.
Yep.
Right. Was it under the Romans?
Yeah.
They were dispersed.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So 2,000
1,000
years
or something like that. Yeah.
Right. So it's not even quote unquote their fault. They didn't leave. They were forced out.
Yeah,
they were dispersed.
Yeah.
Right. So after that time, it was no longer Israel as they had known it up to that point. Yep. Right? It was a Roman state, and eventually it became
part of the
inhabited by what came to be known as Arab Palestinians.
Yeah.
Right. And again, the supreme horrific irony that the Holocaust became the trigger for the creation of the state of Israel.
Yeah. Yes.
Without it, there would be no state of
There
Israel.
Wouldn't have been the impetus in the immediate post-war.
Well, there wouldn't have been the wholesale guilt and shame felt by the world at large of what had occurred. That where they their only possible reaction to it was, well, obviously we cannot deny the Jewish people.
And this is why the British were never really able to stop that flood of Jewish immigration to the Middle East, in spite of their agreements with the Palestinians, saying that they would, because again, they felt that overwhelming sense of guilt and shame of like, oh my God, this happened right under our noses. And it's not like they didn't see the warning signs in the 1930s, after 33.
And, people have been turning back shitloads of Jewish people.
Yep.
So that added to it. And here we are. We literally have now more shiploads of Jewish people, refugees running for the promised land, pulling up on the beaches, jumping out, running. What are you going to do, shoot them?
Yeah.
Now that we've got movie cameras and the world is watching and the world is sympathetic. No, there was no way that was not going to end up in the state of Israel.
Yeah. And so we ended up like Israel. The state of Israel is the last, most recent, obviously, but basically the last European colonization, right?
If you're, you're considering the influence of the Ashkenazim.
Yeah. So it's.
That's okay. That's an interesting adjunct to the whole concept as well. But you're right. That's a very interesting way of putting it. I would not even characterize it, but I believe it is.
No, but one of the parallels are so significant.
It's one of the reasons that the Western world, I believe, feels an affinity for Israel that it does not feel for the Arab nations.
Yes, because Israel is a Western state because of the Ashkenazim.
Yeah,
the Ashkenazi were Europeanized over their 1,000 years of residency in Europe, but they were Westernized by their 1,000 years of residency in the West, and they took that culture with them when they created Israel. And this is something that's often a struggle within Israel politics, that the dominance of the Ashkenazim over, say, Sephardic Jews.
Who actually are making up the majority of Jews in Israel now.
Exactly. Yeah, because of migration, right? Yeah. And so it's this demographic shift away from the Ashkenazim towards the Sephardics and other groups whose just names escape me right now. But this is why we in the West have seen an affinity with Israel because they were more like us culturally.
Exactly.
Than the Arab
and
states.
Also in their institutions and but it started with that empathy and sympathy. Starting in 44, 45.
And it was to me it was an act of absolute colossal stupidity by the Arabs that they did not seek an affinity with the West on cultural basis of being a monotheistic Abrahamic faith. And instead, when faced with the challenge of Israel in 48, those morons, and I'm going to say it was stupid, ran to the worst enemy the West had, which was the Soviet Union. Had Nasser, had the other Arabic leaders instead sought a rapprochement with the United States on the basis of religious faith. Because it's not like the United States always had a love affair with Judaism. They did not.
Absolutely not.
American traditional, like going back through the 17th and 18th centuries, America had a very deep anti-Semitic streak.
Oh, there's no question. But again,
and had the Arabs gone to, taken a page out of Lawrence of Arabia and gone to the United States, playing that angle of we are both peoples of the book, we are an Abrahamic faith, and there are so many parallels between Islam and Christianity that they could have played up to drive a wedge between America and Israel. It was such in terms, I'm not saying right and wrong, I'm saying like in terms of effectiveness. It was such an opportunity lost by the Arab states and a colossal blunder that is playing out in front of us right now.
Are you talking post the first war?
Yes, post 48.
Post 48.
Yeah.
Post the 48 war. Okay, because if you're talking about going into the 48 war, that would have been a whole different. It wouldn't have been realistic at all.
No,
it was
post 48.
It was Truman in power.
Yep.
And there was that. Essentially, the state of Israel is not going to not exist. Right? Get used to that. And they were looking at this, going, "What the hell do you mean? You're just going to magically wave your magic wand? There's going to be this Jewish state where there wasn't one 3 minutes ago, right? Like, and I think that's the biggest grievance of the Palestinian people, right?
Oh yeah, sure. Like I said, I'm not talking about right or wrong.
Right.
I'm saying they had a problem, and they chose the worst possible means of they had a problem. They needed foreign support. They made the dumbest decision possible in where to seek foreign support.
Well, they couldn't go right away, but because actually, Perun just had a very good video dropped this morning on it. I've got most of the way through, but not through. But he was talking about so in 48, both Soviet. In the first two major Arab Israeli conflicts, the Soviet Union and the United States were aligned in their positions. They were They were the first two countries to acknowledge Israel's legitimacy, acknowledge Israel as a state. Then Israel got tied up with France and the UK in the 56 war, and the US and the Soviet Union came out against. Right. Both of them came out against the 56 war,
or both of them came out against Britain and France.
And that was that was because Britain and France had built the Suez Canal and Egypt wanted to nationalize it.
They did nationalize it.
They did nationalize it.
And then Egypt and France, France and Great Britain, invaded to try
to seize it and keep it open.
Yeah. And then the Israelis were part of that as well.
Yeah, and of course the United States, both the United States and Russia, did not want a reemergence of Europe as global powers.
Yeah,
right.
So they were united.
Both.
So that was 56.
So it wasn't until in between 56
junior position
and 67 that the Arabs are actually able to start to approach the Soviet Union.
So 56 was Eisenhower.
Yes.
Okay.
Eisenhower and Khrushchev were in agreement on that.
Yeah. And again, at this period, and this is the key moment, right? In that period between 56 and 67.
Yeah, that's when that divide happened. Yep.
That's when the Arabs made the most colossal blunder in their modern history by allowing themselves to be pulled into the Soviet orbit.
Well, I think there was also something else going on there in that, at least ostensibly, in Libya, for sure, I think Iraq, and possibly Syria as well, but Libya for sure, that was a socialist thing.
Yes, it was.
So they were essentially embracing...
They allowed themselves to be swayed by the disproportionate influence of an urban intellectual class.
Right. So is that their fault?
Yes, 100%.
Is it the Russian? Is it the Soviets' fault for coming in and?
Nope, it's not the Soviets'
exploiting
fault.
that. Is it the U.S.?
The Soviets were acting in accord with their own self-interest. But
the U.S. Arab fucked up by the West fucked up by not leveraging something that would prevent that from happening.
No, I mean, the West wanted to maintain some kind of influence within the region.
Yeah.
Israel was a perfect proxy for doing that. The West got what they wanted. The Soviets got what they wanted. The Arabs, however, should have been able to read their own room and understand that it would have been, number one, it would have been, you would have undermined Israel's key ally. And like, again, especially after 67, like by the time of like there was 3 of them, right? There was 63 was the 6 day.
No, 67 was 6 day.
Okay, so Yom Kippur was
73. Yeah.
What was the one before the 6 day?
It was 56.
That was 56. The Suez crisis.
Yeah,
Suez crisis.
Yeah. So they should have figured out at that point that that their equipment that they're getting is not going to beat Western equipment, right? That is never going to be on par.
Well, they should have figured that out.
They didn't.
Well, okay, yeah, they didn't. But the other thing is that it's always going to be a lot harder to overwhelm an Israel that is fully supported by the West. That instead of trying to get more support from the Soviets, they would have been better off to undermine Israeli support. The other thing is, why is an extremely conservative religious society allying itself with an atheist power? That makes no sense.
That's true, but
that makes no sense.
I think we're getting off track here.
Oh yeah,
when it comes to when we're talking about the Palestinian.
Yeah, what I'm saying is neither here nor there. It's now made moot by the passage of time. So yeah, it's not worth spending more breath on.
Again, fascinating conversation.
Yeah, but
I'm
not relevant.
arguing that.
Yeah, not relevant.
I keep trying to pull this back because because in my mind there are so many layers to this onion that we haven't gotten to yet.
Yeah.
Well, that are
we would have to do like
there are more germane to this conversation.
So let's refocus here.
24 or 48 hours of podcasting just to pull the first layer of the onion. So
Okay, so let's talk about where we're at right now, here and now.
So let's get back to the anti-Semitic.
All right,
because that was our starting point.
Yeah. So I will say as a source, I'm using Nellie Bowles' TGIF as one of my sources, TGIF column from last Friday on the Free Press. And this is obviously a biased source. Nellie Bowles' wife is Barry Weiss, and Barry Weiss has never been shy about her support for the state of Israel.
Right. Well, yeah.
And state of Israel.
Yeah.
And her support for Zionism. Yes. She's never been shy about it. Yeah. Right. It was one of the things that made her an odd person out at the New York Times.
That said, consider the source.
So,
but that's important. Let's get back to that later.
Yeah. So anyway, but she just did her TGIF column is like a news aggregator column. And so she's just pulled in a bunch of things. And so there's here's like a post that Black Lives Matter made. Black Lives Matter grassroots stands in solidarity with our Palestinian family who are currently resisting 57 years of settler colonialism and apartheid. As black people continue to fight to end militarism and mass incarceration in our own communities, let us understand the resistance in Palestine as an attempt to tear down the gates of the world's largest open-air prison. As a radical black organization grounded in abolitionist ideas, we see clear parallels between black and Palestinian people.
Right.
Okay. Is that anti-Semitic?
Strictly speaking, it is doctrinaire, textbook definition, no.
It is anti-Zionist hegemony.
Sure, it's anti-Zionist, yeah.
Anti-Zionist
does that
hegemony.
distinction really matter?
I think it does. It is important. And again, this comes back to our original point. We cannot shut down the conversation. In fact, it negates the conversation we should be having about this statement, right? There's plenty enough to discuss, to find right or wrong with this statement without labeling it as anti-Semitic.
Sure. Yeah. But I'm saying whether it is or whether it isn't, it doesn't really matter much. The effect on the ground is still the same. Maybe it is motivated by an anti-Jewish sentiment. Maybe it is. Maybe it's not.
Again, I think it does matter. It does matter. It does matter because we don't want to be drawn into every time something like this comes up. We need to stay on point for the conversation, and everybody needs to be able to see that for what it is. It's like the thing that you put up, and we didn't get into because you had some other points you want to carry on with. But that other post that had the picture of the paraglider with the Palestinian flags and with Palestine, right?
Yep.
I would have had no problem with I stand with Palestine.
Yeah, just say the Palestinian flag.
Right? Just have the Palestinian flag.
When you put that silhouette of the parachutist on there,
the paraglider, that's how some of them got in. Is that correct?
And you're specifically saying, when you put that up, to me, you're saying, I'm okay with murdering civilians for the sake of creating shock and fear. Which is a classic, like my definition of terrorism is a strike against strictly civilian targets for the purpose of intimidation and fear. To achieve a political result by literally terrorizing or frightening the civilian population.
Most prominently they used the paragliders to land at the music festival. Where they killed something in the neighborhood of 260
I think
people.
Where they just gunned down.
Last I heard it was over 300
people who were absolutely no threat.
Well, in fact, we're probably some of the most peaceful and quite possibly pro-Palestinian people you're going to find.
It's probably going to be at a rock concert.
Or so there was a demonstration outside the Sydney Opera House. We can listen to the audio if you want.
Roll it.
Where crowd was chanting "Gas the Jews." Should come through. It's not coming through.
Oh well. Oh. But I did see this video. Where they're chanting "Gas the Jews."
Probably because it should be over.
Maybe start it again because they've switched to the takbir.
Try from the beginning. Might have to edit this out.
It says. That's plenty.
That's plenty. Yeah.
So,
point made.
Again, in some of the many distinctions, I'm going to suggest need to be made along the way here. While at any time hearing this is offensive,
and it's an advocation of genocide,
and in consideration of the events themselves that just occurred, that makes it even worse.
Yes.
Right. I am also going to say these are also, and be sure, please let me elaborate, and I'll try to be quick about it without too much hesitation. Right. It's understandable and to be expected. Right. Because there are emotional reactions to things, and this is clearly one of them, that have been stirred up within the Palestinian diaspora now. Right, and there are always intellectual, logical discussions to be had. Right, this is obviously an emotional expression. Right, and the reason it's to be expected, and it's so many things piling on top of each other. There's the reason Hamas was ruling the Gaza Strip. It's because they got voted in because they had popular support. Because these people have felt so disenfranchised for the longest time due to the back and forth grievances. And again, it's not justifying anything on either side, but there's been so much grief between the two sides for generations now, right? So it gets to that point, and they're going, and the current administration in Israel has not been working at all with...
I'm not really cool with this, man.
With the Arab peoples, hang on. I'm not justifying anything.
No. But when you say it's to be expected and understandable, I'm not cool with that.
It's understandable that people are going to react this way. We have people who are living in squalor and have been for decades and generations. Did you extend the
same charity during the hoax when Trump supposedly said there were fine people on both sides? Before we knew that was a hoax, were you that charitable in the reaction to that? Saying, well, this is to be expected. The views of these white supremacists are abhorrent, but given the emotion and the context, it's to be expected.
No.
See, that's why I kind of reject this. Like, no, if you're going to say, like, what you're saying has logical ground to it, that, emotions are running high. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of hatred here. But unless you're willing to extend that courtesy across the board,
it's not a courtesy. I'm not extending.
Unless you're willing to extend, or let's put those extenuations. Unless you're willing to say these extenuating circumstances, I will apply to every such interethnic conflict, dude. That don't wash. Wash. You can't say that, we're going to offer a little bit of understanding for Palestinians here, but we're not going to offer that understanding to white supremacists.
When I say understandable, I'm saying that purely objectively. I'm not saying I sympathize with it. I'm saying this is understandable and in the same context as I was saying it's to be expected, right? This is not a surprise to me.
That to me sounds like a mitigating circumstance.
No.
You're saying instead of you coming out and saying this is absolutely unacceptable, 100% unacceptable, and must be condemned unequivocally, no qualifications.
Well,
you're saying, should be.
You're shutting me down and you're talking over me as I try to express.
Okay. I'm just saying that's where you're taking me.
I am 100%.
If you don't want to go there.
There are very few.
Take me somewhere else.
There are very few circumstances under which I will take a hardline stance, such as you just expressed. All right, I have already expressed that I find the words that are being used abhorrent.
Okay. Okay, good. Just want to nail that one down.
I have already stated as much. When I say they are understandable, is understandable and to be expected. I'm not surprised in both those cases. That's why I'm using both those terms.
Okay.
I am not surprised.
You are not surprised. Okay.
We should not be surprised if these things were being said. Now, I am about to utter an absolute when you draw the comparison to the guys in Charlottesville, right?
Yeah.
Because when we're talking about the quote-unquote interethnic
struggles, hatred,
strife, right? And the grievances behind that, right? They shall not replace us. I mean, fuck off. Someone actually brought up a really good point this year. They shall not replace us. All these guys in fucking tan khakis and stuff like that, tiki couture. It's the most ridiculous thing I've seen in years, right? On top of which they haven't even replaced themselves since 1945, for fuck's sake, right?
You mean like in demographic decline?
The Jewish people have not replaced what they lost in the Holocaust. All right? They have not reachieved those numbers.
Okay, so who was saying they shall not replace us?
That's what they were chanting in Charlottesville.
The white supremacists.
Yes, the Jews shall not replace us, right?
Okay,
so
gotcha.
That's why I'm saying there's, in comparison with these two.
I thought the Chancellorsville thing was anti-black.
No.
It was anti-Jewish?
No, Charlottesville.
Charlottesville, where the guy drove his car into the protesters.
No, different one. That might have been later the same protest.
Yeah, there was somebody.
Same event though, wasn't it?
There was
same event.
There was a couple people driving cars into crowds, but there was one at Charlottesville, and then there was one a couple years later. A BLM guy drove one into a white crowd.
That's different. Though. That's different.
Okay.
I thought, but of course, the hoax was made that Trump said, "there's fine people on both sides."
That's what I'm
talking about.
I don't want to go down that road. I'm pretty sure. I thought he had said that,
but a lot of people did. It turns out that it was a hoax. He never actually said that. But at any rate, but the point is that people for a long time believed he did.
Okay.
Right. So,
anyways,
but I thought that was an anti-black thing. Sorry, I didn't know it was an anti-Jewish
thing.
I
don't compare the grievances of the chants in Charlottesville to the grievances of the people chanting these horrific things now as the same. Right. All right. So that's where I do draw a distinction.
Okay.
Right. And again, I'm not surprised that they're saying this because right now, this horrific act that's been done is seen through a different lens by them, right?
No, sure.
They have seen...
Perpetrators always see things through a different lens.
The Palestinian people are not Hamas. They are not the ones inflicting these things, right?
Okay, yeah.
And that's, again, there are so many distinctions we need to be careful to make as we have this conversation. And the people of Gaza... Yes, they voted for them, right? So are they responsible?
They voted for them once in 2005.
Yeah. Right.
They haven't relinquished power since.
But do they have widespread public support? I don't know.
I saw some stats this week actually. So compared to the West Bank, right? There's still more militant viewpoint within been surveyed, in their attitude towards Israel and the Jewish people and the Jewish state.
But is there broad public support for Hamas? Like Do they have more than?
You mean within Gaza?
Yeah, within Gaza. Is there more than say 40%?
Well, no, it's expressed in surveys, anonymous surveys, 50%.
Okay, so that's a pretty healthy. I mean, compared to most like democratically elected governments, if you're over 40, you're in landslide territory.
But again, that to me is understandable and not unexpected, as in not surprising, given that it's one of the most densely populated places on earth and one of the poorest.
Is it Fatah that runs the West Bank?
Yes.
Well, this is what I'm saying. Like, can we make a distinction between Hamas and the people of Gaza if the people of Gaza feel that Hamas accurately represents their voice?
50% of them do, and that's undoubtedly influenced by the fact that it is an authoritarian. It is an authoritarian state.
I am not up to speed on the internal politics of Gaza and the West Bank. Like, I don't know what other factions there are. I'm not aware of any protests, say in 2016, or you know what I mean, in the time between 23 and 07, when the Hamas takeover occurred. We can say, well, look, they're an authoritarian regime because they seized power in 2007. There hasn't been an election since. Have the people of Gaza felt any burning need for an election? Or are they by and large satisfied with the rule of Hamas?
Or have they had no option?
That's the question has to be asked.
You know,
I don't know what the answer is.
And I think it's tough for us to parse through that. So I'm just saying, okay, my understanding is, based on the single statistic I've seen, up to 50% of the people of Gaza are more or less okay with Hamas and their stance on Israel ruling them, right?
Yeah.
So that's literally glass half empty, glass half full. Which one is it, right? Anyone can look at it from any perspective. But, again, it's not the people of Gaza who just did this. It is the dickheads who have been in charge of the place for a decade.
That depends. I mean, that depends on is there broad, widespread support for these activities within the Gazan population?
Well, obviously, we've seen some of the reactions to it, right?
That's in the diaspora,
right?
But is that in Gaza itself? Well, because often a diaspora can be very different in its outlook than the original population.
I can only imagine there's something similar to it, and if not, it's in as much as it's different, it's actually worse in a different way, because they've had 2,000 casualties, 60% of which have been women and children, as a result of this, right? And so for me, I'm actually. And I've heard from multiple different sources that some of the Israeli military activity, some of the settler activity, to me it's a bit distasteful. Again, it's understandable, and there's been an understandable emotional reaction from the Israeli side, but that's a shit ton of civilian casualties. And I don't believe they're all just collateral. And even if those that are collateral, Israel doesn't maintain any higher moral high ground. Sorry, by pulling an eye for an eye.
Yeah, I guess the only moral card they can play is that you attacked us first.
Yeah,
that's it.
Absolutely. And not only did you attack us first, but what you did was horrific. I mean, you went into kibbutzim and you slaughtered women and children.
Yeah, deliberately.
Civilians.
Yep.
Right? There's no question that what they did was heinous.
But again, it's and now this is where I'm going to say it's understandable. Imagine the anger and the rage that the nation of Israel has experienced as a result of those attacks. It's pretty hard to say to an IDF strike fighter pilot, "Hey man, don't hit that building." You might hit
absolutely. I get it. In fact, I was telling Steve this before you showed up. On my way here, I was listening to the thrice accursed CBC, and they actually had a segment, and it lasted my whole drive here, less the 11 o'clock news or 10 o'clock news, and she was interviewing two men who were good friends. One who is of the Palestinian diaspora, one who is of the Jewish faith. They both live in Montreal. They're colleagues. They're very, very good friends. And the interviewer herself is of Palestinian stock. Canadian Palestinian. And the conversation, the questions she was having were very, very deep and poignant. And it was basically, how did you two, as very, very close friends, get through the last week?
Right.
And their responses to her questions and each other and what they experienced, because they're both, obviously, if they're very good friends, they're moderates. Right. And the things that they were saying, and even in dealing with their own community on either side of this issue, they were talking about how like the Jewish fellow, I can't remember his name, he was talking about how his community is in so much pain right now, so much anger, and he knows that he can't ask them not to be angry. Right? But in the meantime, he doesn't subscribe to the view that, now we need to just go and do the same thing back to them. Right?
Right.
But, and again, putting those two things together, he knows that is the toughest thing, is to combine those two statements to his people.
Right.
Right. I know you're angry, and I'm not going to ask you not to be angry, but we can't go do the same thing to these people. Right. So, yeah, I get it.
But,
and that's when we talk about the grievances. Sorry, Steve. I know you're finally, this is your third, fourth, fifth, sixth time trying to talk. But we talk about the grievances. Yes, there are the immediate grievances, and right now they're with the Israelis, and rightfully so. But we're talking about the Palestinian people. We cannot forget that they've had grievances for 75 years now. Right? Sorry, Steve.
My thing, going back a little bit, is the responsibility for the immiseration of Gaza lies with Hamas, not with Israel, not with the West.
The responsibility for?
The immiseration of Gaza.
Okay. Yes. That's a word I haven't heard before. So, immiseration?
Yeah, making them miserable.
Yeah. Okay.
Making the situation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hamas or Gaza gets a lot of aid from the UN, from the United States specifically, and from Israel.
And Europe.
Right? Okay. So they get a lot of money. Hamas has a significant coastline that they could use, that they could monetize. Yeah. Right? They could create, trade, they could turn, they could, Hamas, Gaza could have been turned into, say, a Eastern Mediterranean Monaco, as an example of something they could have done.
Or Lebanon, for Christ's sake. I mean, it was Lebanon.
Well, do you want to be Lebanon?
What Lebanon?
Lebanon has in the past.
Yeah, what Lebanon was historical. But, they could have created a tax haven, similar to Cyprus or something like that. There's things that they could have done to improve the lot of Palestinians in Gaza.
On your point, just on support from Qatar alone, according to a Deutsche Welle article, the Emirate of Qatar has transferred 1.5 billion euros to Hamas.
Right.
Since 2000.
Well, actually,
Hamas is that officially to Hamas or officially to the state
to Hamas,
to the state of Gaza?
And Hamas actually, the leadership of Hamas actually lives in Qatar. So,
also the Turks. You mentioned the Turks have given substantial diplomatic and economic support, as well as a variety of groups within Europe.
No question. But I'm not surprised.
But also, I want to point out that the Israelis in the last 48 hours have designated safe zones within Gaza and issued public warnings to Gazans to evacuate themselves to those safe zones because we're going to destroy the other places.
Yeah.
And Hamas is forcing Gazan citizens to stay where they are, to increase civilian casualties because, and Hamas regularly puts weapons caches in hospitals and mosques and daycares and stuff like that, right? So Hamas has for years used the Gazan population as human shields, right? And it's.
There's I'm really looking at a Guardian article. And it said that, Hamas is many things. And yes, it runs Gaza's health service.
Well, wait one. Are you quoting The Guardian?
I am quoting
of all
The Guardian,
things?
yes. and administers the education service. But at the same time, its police have broken the bones of children for simply wearing a scarf affiliating with Fatah. So, yeah, they are. Yeah, I think Steve's absolutely right that the misery of the Gazan population is because Hamas has always prioritized guns over butter.
Well, okay, so they certainly haven't ameliorated the situation.
No.
And I think this also is a point on the side of the column, in the column where we check off a box that says, okay, the people of Gaza are intimidated by Hamas, and therefore...
Perhaps. Or maybe, at the very least, propagandized, maybe.
Yeah. Well, keeping the population of Gaza immiserated, as they do, serves a couple of ends for Hamas. One, it's always propaganda, right? Oh, look at the misery we live in. Look at the misery. It's always Israel's fault. Two, giving or preventing young men of Gaza from having any other outlets.
Yeah.
Right? So they can't get jobs. So actually, Israel just started, just before this, I guess last year or year before, started issuing more work permits to Gazans to work in Israel, right? The situation in the West Bank is much different. For example, like SodaStream, which is an Israeli company, does all their manufacturing in the West Bank, right? And it's done by people in the West Bank as a project,
Yeah.
And Fatah is a secular Arab political organization, whereas Hamas is specifically a religious one. But so by keeping Gaza in that miserable state, they keep a steady supply of recruits who have no other outlet to exercise their
Yeah, which the funny thing for me is, I think I brought it up before, but to your point, all one has to do is look at the Irish example and what happened since the Good Friday Accords, right? The Irish economy, and by extension the Northern Irish economy, got so much better that all of a sudden, like, that there was young men had better things to do with their time, and they had money to do it with,
And that takes away a lot of maneuver room for religious fundamentalists on either side. Who, when they're trying to, like the whole bit about Brexit, and how do we resolve the border between the North and the South, a lot of people really tried to exploit that to ramp up hostilities again. But it lacked popular support because, people
there was a period of prosperity and peace.
Yeah,
right?
say, look, man, I've got a job. I'm doing better now than my parents ever did. Why would I throw that away over, sure, it's an important issue, but there are other ways that we can resolve this.
Well, astonishingly,
prosperity is an amazing preventer of conflict.
Astonishingly, for two reasons, I was surprised that they actually decided to focus on, okay, whatever solution is going to come out of this, it's going to leave the border between Ulster and the Republic open, right? Even though we just voted for Brexit, but Northern Ireland, one of the reasons, Northern Ireland voted against Brexit overwhelmingly.
And so the Scottish, actually.
And so they want to be part of it. So that's a good reason to keep it open. The other reason is all the powers that be that mattered looked at that and said, we do not want a repeat of the Troubles. And therefore, we are going to keep this economic prosperity going. So if there's going to be a barrier to trade, it's going to be in the Irish Sea between Ulster and the rest of the UK.
And to be honest, that's really mitigatable. I mean, there's always going to be a barrier to trade between the British mainland and Northern Ireland because of the Irish Sea. It's always going to be an obstacle loading stuff on and off a ship to take it to Scotland and even then the closest journey, like what, you're going to take it to Liverpool maybe or one of those ports on the Irish Sea. When it's not economically worth like the savings you would get by getting around, say, trade tariffs and barriers between the UK, between Europe and a non-European, non-EU member, are now mitigated by the cost of shipping to Ireland, sending it over the open border, and then loading it on a ship again and sending it to Liverpool. So this is a very, very solvable problem.
So, which is again, I'm impressed that they stepped outside of the box. They identified the two priorities and found the most reasonable solution, even though it's technically not within the purview of the laws they've just created for themselves, right? Yeah. Getting back to Steve's point, absolutely. So what makes it interesting here is because Hamas was voted in and hasn't given up power, yes, politically, because that's how they define their mission. Yeah, they're not going to spend that money on the people because they need, as Patty said, they need people to be able to look and say, hey, look at all the misery here still. Here's a question. Because I haven't been paying attention. Did all of the Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, have those refugees now ended up in the two Palestinian areas, the West Bank and Gaza?
No. My understanding is that they've been largely assimilated into Lebanese society.
No.
So they finally got rid of the camps and assimilated them?
Well, they haven't gotten rid of them. They become permanent settlements.
Yeah.
They become permanent cities.
Okay, but they're not tent cities. They're not refugee camps.
No.
They're actually neighborhoods
permanent
now?
structures, yeah. Where, I mean, you start with a tent city and then, well, let's round up some cinder blocks. Looks like we're going to be here a while. And then they start developing an economy all their own. And then people start marrying in and out of the Lebanese society.
So now they're part of Lebanese society?
Largely, yeah.
Very interesting.
So,
right? So it sounds like Gaza's the only place.
Gaza and the West Bank. So, and like, for example, it's not Palestinian factions within Lebanon that are attacking IDF troops. It's Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A strictly Lebanese entity. So there are people who say, oh, yeah, I'm Palestinian because my grandfather was born in Palestine and, so is my maternal grandmother, for example. But really, when push comes to shove, they consider themselves more Lebanese. Like their reality, like they say, oh yeah, I'm Palestinian, in the same way that a guy here might say, oh yeah, I'm Irish.
Yeah,
no, you're never going to go to Ireland.
Yeah, I'm Swedish.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm Danish. Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a cultural thing. They're not going to up and say, well, if we were ever, like, they have absolutely no plans of returning to, or say moving to the West Bank or moving to Gaza, or saying, let's say some kind of accord was reached, citizenship was granted, to, like, say Israel became some kind of multicultural state or something like that. They're not going to pack up and move to Israel. It's like, well, no, I've got a shop here. I run a business here that I inherited from my father. This is what I do. My roots are here. My extended family is here. This is where I am.
Yeah.
So there's those ties now that occurred in Lebanon that did not occur, obviously, in the West Bank with Jordan or in the Gaza Strip with Egypt.
Well, and this is where my mind went as you were describing all this, right? And it was a stream of consciousness coming from what you said. That, yeah, they're Lebanese now, but they're Hezbollah.
Right? Hezbollah is a different thing.
Well,
totally different thing.
Okay.
The Palestinians have largely they still have an identity.
Yeah.
Okay. They still have an identity as being Palestinians.
Yeah.
But now they are tied to Lebanon, simply by virtue of being there.
Okay.
My mistake. 50 years.
My mistake. I was drawing. I thought you were talking about Palestinians who are now Lebanese who happen to be Hezbollah as well. But here's the thing.
Hezbollah is a Shiite entity, and the Palestinians are Sunnis.
Exactly. Okay, so here's the thing. I'm looking at Hamas, right? And I think this is the strongest argument against the statements that are coming out in support of Hamas. Mm-hmm. Anyone who is coming out and saying, because this is liberation of the Palestinian people. No, it is not, right? And I'm not even talking about the acts of terror.
Yeah.
No. I'm talking about the aims of Hamas. The aims of Hamas are not the liberation of the Palestinian people. The aims of Hamas are the destruction of Israel and all people Jewish. Mm-hmm. And by the way, anyone who isn't actually Muslim.
So getting back to the original question, when people say, I stand with Hamas, is that specifically anti-Semitic?
Not intentionally. I think the two statements that you've shown
is it simply just because
it's an ignorance. It's the same way that
they're just ignorant of the fact that Gazans
what Hamas really stands for.
That the Gazans are really in poverty and misery because of Hamas.
And Hamas is not a political entity; it's a religious one.
Yeah.
You know, they they are not about the liberation of Palestinians.
Well, and this is something that needs to be talked about, like the conduct of Hamas, like Steve's point about how the miserable conditions in Gaza are absolutely like the immiseration of Gaza is absolutely Hamas's responsibility. And we talk about the traditional grievances of the Palestinian people against Israel. Well, if they had turned Gaza, if they had monetized the assets of Gaza and turned it into a new Monaco, if they had turned it into, like, for example, you are in a very tight geographic area, very tight geographic constraints, heavily urbanized. What options do you have? Well, you're not going to be an agricultural power, that's for sure. You don't have any natural resources that you can exploit. So then, yeah, what we do have is a wonderful climate. And we do have
beaches,
beautiful geography and beaches. And you're right beside a very wealthy continent called Europe, which does want a nice, warm Mediterranean vacation spot. They absolutely couldn't monetize that. You do have, as an urban environment, with a high concentration of population, it makes reform and excellence within your education system much easier. Like, say, consider how difficult that is for a place like Finland or Russia, where you have a widely dispersed population. A concentrated population would be very easy, or relatively so, comparatively so, to produce excellence in an education system, and then have very specialized manufacturing and, say, the information economy.
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's
they could have done this. They chose not to.
Yeah.
They deliberately chose not to. And instead, they chose the path of warfare, conflict, poverty, and death. This was a deliberate choice. Whereas, like, again, we talk, well, there's, historical grievances. These guys are living in a giant open-air prison. That's a two-way street. Okay? There's nobody trying to get into Gaza. All right? There are no Africans fleeing poverty who are saying, let's go to Gaza, man. They're the Monaco of the Arab world. Let's go there, because that's where prosperity is.
There's still an element, and again, there's so many things playing into this, right? There's still an element of people they're going back to 75 years, and they're going, this is my home. This is where my grandfather came from. This was our land. I can see the land that my grandfather owned. It was taken from him, right? So they're still on that. There's still those grievances, right? And again, there's so much bullshit to fling back and forth in history, and it's all fresh in people's mind. And organizations like Hamas exploit it and keep it active, right? One of the reasons I asked about the camps in Lebanon is because I know that the other Arab nations, rich as they are, deliberately kept the refugees in those camps for generations, so that the rest of the world would look at it and see the Palestinian problem for what it was still, right? Perpetuating it instead of solving it. So, I mean, I think it's a bit counterintuitive to go, well, it's Hamas's fault that Gaza sucks across the board, right? Yeah. One of the reasons that Gaza even exists now as an autonomous, as autonomous and separate from Israel, is because of a peace process that actually started getting the foot in the door towards a two-state solution. Yeah. Right?
Well, for a comparative, let's look at Germany. Had a huge, something like over a quarter, or something like a third of its population ethnically cleansed from what is now other countries. You have a very, very...
Sorry, please explain.
Say Poland, primarily Poland, the territories of, and half of Russia, East Prussia, Pomerania, Silesia.
Okay.
Those basically almost 50% of Germany in 1939 was now redistributed to the Czech Republic, Poland, and the Soviet Union. So we've got that population that's massively shifted into what became the Federal Republic of Germany and the German Democratic Republic.
So you're saying these were German-speaking peoples that were taken from those places and shifted to the...
ethnically cleansed across the Oder-Neisse line.
Into the FDR.
Okay. Or not the Oder-Neisse line, across the
Elbe.
Yeah, the Oder River into like the border, current day border between Poland and Germany.
Okay.
Massive German population relocated.
Okay.
A real and genuine concern for the Federal Republic going through in the 1950s is, of course, they're trying to rehabilitate Germany's image within Europe and integrate within a Europe that still very much remembers German aggression. How do we deter German revanchism? Because there were very, very large and popular movements, say from 45 to 55 in Germany, that refused, that rejected the idea of two Germanys. And like I remember seeing, like in a museum, an electoral election poster of a moderate party, like I think the Christian Democrats, that clearly showed Germany in three sectors, that it should all be one. And the far easternmost sector of the three was the territories that were assigned over to Poland and the Kaliningrad Oblast to the Soviet Union. There was a very popular movement within Germany saying that no, Germany should be allowed to reacquire its 1939 borders. That is German territory. Well, how do you defeat that? And the approach the federal government took in Bonn was, we got to make people prosperous where they are. Now, there was always that generation that over the age of 20, where they had started to establish their adult lives in Pomerania and Silesia, in East Prussia, in Breslau, in Königsberg, in Danzig, that never ever resolved, like always felt aggrieved that they were ethnically cleansed from their homes, and they never really gave up the belief that those territories were rightfully German and should be returned to Germany. But their children did. Their children had prosperity in Frankfurt, in Hesse, in Hamburg, who then said, you know what? Yeah, it was pretty shitty what happened, but my home is here.
Yeah, I get it.
And because they were prosperous, they adopted those new homes. Whereas the Palestinians never had prosperity, so they had no reason to adopt their current situation as a home.
Yeah.
And this is a major failing of the leadership provided by Hamas and Fatah.
Well, no, because I don't think it is a Fatah. Because Fatah is actually...
Fatah has definitely been doing better than Hamas.
Better, yes, but they still have not delivered prosperity.
That's
in the West Bank.
But you were just talking about
because they need Israel to do it.
Yeah,
right.
But it sounds like
there is some degree of integration.
What was the Israeli company you were talking about?
SodaStream.
SodaStream.
Yeah,
right.
But it's just
one. Yeah.
So that's one, but it's a step in the right direction, and they're allowing for that.
But again, the big problem here is that Fatah is, and this is why Hamas won the 2007 elections, because Fatah is notoriously corrupt. Horribly corrupt.
Well, it doesn't sound like Hamas is any less corrupt, because if there's billions of dollars going to there and
just that
not seeing anything.
Hamas directs it not so much to their own private bank accounts, but Hamas directs it towards violence.
Yeah.
And the Qassam brigades and a perpetual, never-ending war with Israel.
In the context of perpetuating their real objective, as it were, Hamas is not as corrupt as Fatah might be.
I mean, there's still plenty corrupt.
Yeah,
like I understand from what I've been reading just in the last couple of days, there are massive villas on the coast which belong to, like, beautiful homes that belong to that would not be out of place, in the toniest neighborhoods of Southern California or Florida, but they belong to the Hamas leadership, right? So there's definitely funneling of some of that money to their own benefit, but it's not as egregious as Fatah, in that the majority of those funds, instead of building roads, building schools, improving the water system, improving the health system, they buy rockets with which to overwhelm the Iron Dome system, or
Fatah does?
No, Hamas.
Yeah.
That they
nothing happens
towards bombs and warfare.
Well, I think it's not all that surprising. I think we've, over our lifetimes, we've seen plenty of examples around the world the poorest nations, they're the ones who get the most aid from the rest of the world, but they're also the ones where there's the most corruption.
Right.
And because I think poverty just, once a person
corruption
gets all
creates
this,
poverty. Government corruption creates poverty.
Yeah.
Economics 101.
Well, I think it just stops it from,
yeah.
They look at it, they go, look what I got control of, all this money. Well, I'm not going to spend it on what it was supposed to be going to because I could have it.
Or just, this is my way I can inflict death upon my enemy. Right? Like, I mean, to say that Hamas is more principled and ideologically has more ideological integrity than Fatah is clearing a low bar.
Yeah.
But it is still definitely a factor. It's not that, like, the biggest contrast between Hamas and Fatah is that Fatah has channeled that money into lining, the leadership of Fatah has channeled aid money into lining their own pockets. The leadership of Hamas has channeled the lion's share of the money into perpetuating constant warfare with Israel.
Yeah.
So are they corrupt? Yes. Are they corrupt as Fatah? No. Not by a long shot.
But which people are better off?
Neither. Because the end result is the same. And arguably, you could say that the people of Gaza are far worse off because there are no bombs falling on Ramallah right now.
No.
Exactly.
There are no bombs falling on
That's my argument, that
Bethlehem right now.
Ultimately, despite its lack of trying, Fatah is governing its people better.
Well, just because they haven't picked fights that they can't win.
Yeah, because that's not their aim
right now. Clearing a low bar, perhaps I am damning with faint praise, but the fact that they have not led their people into a war of attrition that they cannot possibly win, you have to say that the government of Fatah is less wretched than the governance of Hamas.
Well, I think the governance of Hamas is about to come to an end. Whatever occurs, whatever's left of Gaza, population, infrastructure, physically, and who's governing it, it ain't going to be Hamas after this. And maybe, I don't know, maybe the UN steps in. I think their best case is the UN steps in and actually administers the money. Not that there's a lot of, not that there's not a lot of waste going on there. I get it.
Again,
I'm just saying,
looking like you want to shut something off.
No.
Oh, you just
actually, I wouldn't mind.
You want to take a pause?
We can pause. I think maybe we after the pause we can come back. Maybe talk a little bit more about the military situation instead.
I would also like to talk about the effects domestically. That the effects, how is this conflict affecting our situation immediately?
Right.
To go back to, like, say, talk about the protests and some of the reaction that I'm seeing, how this conflict is making all the Western nations question their own internal conduct.
Mm-hmm. Sure thing.
Okay.
Okay, during the break, Trent, you had you started on something.
I was looking at the thing Steve had up,
the tweets,
the tweets, right, and talked about the decolonialization, or decolonization. So, for reference, we got three things that are being quoted here, three posts, and they're all talking about post-colonial, anti-colonial, yada yada yada.
Where's this John Collins fella from?
St. Lawrence University.
Okay.
So, quoting some Canadians by the looks of things.
Yeah, a couple.
Anyways, so, but what that brought to mind is, and again, it's difficult to bring up nowadays in the context of what's going on right now, because I'm not about naming, blaming, shaming, right?
Okay.
But it's contributing factors to the big picture, to the onion, to the layers of the onion, right? And again, I always find it. I mean, one of the contexts I'm often coming from, and we were talking about this when it came to our relationship with the Aboriginal peoples in Canada, is, I don't like using oppressors and oppressed or victims or anything like that, right? But it is, to me, it is a matter of relative power, right? And I think that's one thing that's been playing out in a lot of the conversations in Israel, particularly since the last, what I'll call, quote unquote, real war which was the Yom Kippur in 73. After that, it was like the balance of power fell to the Israelis, and there's been nothing that significant until now, right? And so, and then combining that with the colonial question, the colonization question, and this plays into it. When I talked earlier about the current administration in Israel and how it's aligned with the hardline right, which includes the settlers, a lot of the Orthodox, and the Orthodox and the settlers go together quite a bit, right? They're very religious, some of them, and from a lot of the quoted sources I've seen, a fair amount of racism towards, other Israelis for one thing, but towards the Arabs as well. And so I don't know if the kibbutzim were deliberately targeted because of this, but I mean, the fact that the settlements have been pushed on, just going on and on and on. And again, the Palestinians are just watching people occupy their land. And I think that if there hasn't been an actual stated intent that we should be negotiating the return of some of this land, I mean, it's definitely been a hope that, this land that belonged to my grandfather, my great-grandfather, that I can see, right? We might one day get it back, and all of a sudden it's being.
You mean like territories outside the current West Bank?
Outside the current West Bank or Gaza. Oh yeah, I guess it wouldn't be outside Gaza because Gaza's on the sea, right?
Yeah.
And with Israel on the other side of it, but on the West Bank, yeah. And so they're seeing all these lands that used to be theirs, and the Israelis are just building on them and just building settlements. And I'm not sure. I'm not going to go so far as to say that this is outside of international law or anything, but it's been adding to the tensions, and it's been irrespective of any concern to the Palestinians whatsoever, right? And so that to me has been fueling a lot of the tension, right? And again, but that's what this brings up, this colonization, decolonization bullshit, right? That's what people are bringing up. And again, from their armchairs, they're looking at this and they're using this ivory tower term, decolonization, to justify an attitude of their own that's, again, represented itself in, I stand with Hamas, and I'm now going to have a sticker that has a fucking paraglider on it.
Well, just for the reference of to kind of illustrate this for the listener, there are 3 tweets that have been selected that are up on the screen. One from John Collins, I guess, of St. Lawrence University.
Yes.
That says, professor, saying, faculty colleagues, if you think decolonization is fine for your syllabus, or the term decolonization is fine for your syllabus, your curriculum, or your classroom, but not for actual colonized people in Palestine, then you've never understood decolonization. And then a follow-up from a professor at McMaster University saying post-colonial, anti-colonial, and decolonial are not just words you heard in your EDI workshop. And then finally, a quote from a writer for Teen Vogue, who in reference to the attack said, "What did y'all think colonization meant? Vibes, papers, essays, losers," or calling people who didn't, who are aghast at the attacks, a bunch of losers. Now, this is something that I think really ties into something I'd like to discuss with you guys. And we also talked about the protests that sprung up across cities across the Western world. Australia, America, Canada, Europe, basically the immigration countries. I have never, ever seen the kind of reaction to this event from the moderate right that we have today. The hard right has always been anti-immigration. Always. But with the look of these protests, people are asking or there's a widespread belief that these protests were not spontaneous, that they were coordinated, and that they were planned. as part to immediately spring up in coordination with these attacks. Mm-hmm. Like a point you mentioned at the beginning was a group in the United States started churning out statements of support while the attacks were in progress.
Yeah.
Which definitely suggests pre-coordination.
Yeah.
And I am seeing now from sectors and from media voices and analysts who were always very moderate in their criticism of immigration, or they were in support of immigration, but kind of said, well, it should be vetted, right? Mm-hmm. But now I'm seeing more and more analysts asking, maybe, well, not asking, but kind of thinking out loud, saying maybe multiculturalism was a bad idea. Maybe open door immigration was a bad idea, because looking at these statements from like these radicals, but also people of an immigrant background. I haven't named any names beyond the first one, but they're folks of obviously or how would you say, who have roots in that part of the world.
Not that first one.
No, not the first one. That fella from St. Lawrence University is whiter than Woody Allen.
Yeah,
he's just an idiot from a university. But more, I'm seeing again for the first time. I have never seen moderates posing these questions. It has always been a sacred cow. Multiculturalism in Canada has always been, you can't touch it. If you touch it, you're beyond the pale. You had to leave that one alone. Only the radical fringe, like the People's Party, was on that because nobody really paid attention to them. Mm-hmm. But for, say, people in the mainstream right, say members of, say, the conservative parties, be it the provincial or federal level, you did not question multiculturalism. You left that alone. That was too far.
Yeah.
That taboo seems to have been broken with these events.
I think we've had this discussion regarding other terms, right? It's to me the term progressive. You know what? Fucking humanity is progressive. We're all progressive. We've been progressive over the history of humanity.
In a very, very certain look at the word, but we're talking about like Wilsonian progressive. Like when we talk about the progressive era of the 1920s. Mm. So to just say progressive in the sense of humanity moving towards a predetermined destination or a fixed destination, that's a political term.
I think of it as more just humanity is always moving towards something better. And this is why I think I connect what you're talking about with politics, right? It's just about, we're always questioning things. We're always looking at it and we're thinking, okay, how could this be better? What doesn't make sense right now? Right now we're going through a goofy time. Like the shit we're seeing on the screen out here is, I'm just rolling my eyes. If that's the sound you're hearing, folks, is my rusty eyes just
around.
Hell, I had something else to say.
But where do you think this is going to go? Do you think this new questioning within the West, and it's not just within Canada, we're seeing it across like the immigrant receiving countries, and this was already starting. Like this just throws fuel onto the fire in Europe, which was already.
Well, I think that's the distinction to be made, right?
In Europe, they were already questioning the value of immigration.
In Europe, they don't have the sacred cow of multiculturalism like we do here, right? But what I would argue is this: that
nobody does. Other than us.
It's a non-starter. First of all, in Canada, it's a non-starter. Multiculturalism, if it just is. Right? We are now a multicultural society.
We are, but the difference here is that we actively discourage assimilation into a broader Canadian commonality. Mm-hmm. We actively discourage it and we suppress it where we see it, although it does seep through the cracks.
No, I mean, again,
what I mean by this is we broadcast hockey games in Punjabi. Mm-hmm. Now, someone might see, that's a triumph of multiculturalism. I see it as a sign of assimilation.
Yeah.
We're not broadcasting cricket games, Canadian cricket games in Punjabi.
You know what I mean? Now you're splitting hairs unnecessarily.
No. Yeah. I'm saying that there are assimilationist forces at work simply by the fact that we all live in the same place. We're all subject to the same weather. But there are cultural norms that gradually become adopted by a population of newcomers, whether they're consciously aware of it or not. Now, where we are consciously aware of it, as a matter of public policy, we have tried to discourage that, and we have done everything we can to encourage immigrant nations to sustain and preserve their own cultural heritage and uniqueness. I am wondering if that's still going to be the case 10 years from now.
I think it will be because, I mean, first of all, assimilation to some extent is already inevitable. When
to a certain amount.
By grade 12 in high school, our group of friends, we had an actually very large, close group of friends, right?
Yeah.
And in there was a kid who'd been born in India, but he spoke English just like the rest of us.
Yeah.
Right. One from Hong Kong.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't speak English quite as well as the rest of us. Yeah. Right. But it takes no more than one generation. Even if a child is born somewhere else and their parents emigrate here and they start going to school here, like in elementary sometime, by the time they come out at the other end at high school, they're Canadian.
Yes.
Right. Whatever that means.
So there are always going to be certain assimilationist things you cannot fight.
Right. So that's why I'm saying that. But they've still got a little bit of that culture within them.
We're on. Yeah, and that will likewise always be the case. Mm-hmm. You cannot take somebody from another culture, and even 3 generations down the road, there is still going to be a remnant of that culture. For example, the Ukrainian community. Across the Prairie provinces that has been here since 1890 to 1910, the great waves of Ukrainian immigration. Yeah. These people, most of them, have not spoken a word of Ukrainian in 3 generations. Right. And they are thoroughly assimilated into Canadian culture. However, there are still vestiges of that Ukrainian heritage.
Go to their house at Easter time.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, and that's fine. But we are at the other end of that spectrum where we, as our government, our public institutions, actively encourage the retention of a culture.
Yeah, but that is so artificial you can't even enforce it. You know what I mean? It's unenforceable. Yeah, they encourage it, blah, blah, blah.
Well, it's not about enforcing.
And at the same time, we've got Canadian content. Yeah, we got all these paradoxes.
It's not about enforcing. It's about telling people, like, we're giving the official message that you should resist assimilation, that assimilation is a bad thing, and that we are inherently better off for diversity. I mean, we keep saying over and over and over again, diversity is our strength, diversity is our strength, diversity is our strength.
Diversity is our strength. I don't mean that in the Orwellian slogan as it's being perpetuated in the way that you are cynically repeating it. Well, I get that.
I know what you're saying.
Right.
And I would love to do a podcast on that. Like, is diversity a strength?
I mean,
I don't know. I don't think it is. But anyways, I don't want to get distracted on that.
I find it.
But what I'm saying is that now we are questioning in a way that I have never seen before as a result of these events where a lot of people looked up and said, holy cats, what did we allow into our societies? I mean, we have this massive movement that is violent or openly approves of violence. We have this massive population of people who openly advocate and support the most heinous of acts, and they live among us. Could they do that to us if they so chose? What other movements? And again, these protests they give the very, very impression of being pre-planned and pre-organized, so that we know that these foreign entities are now operating within the populations that now reside amongst us. We've seen with recent riots with Eritrean cultural events. Have our immigration policies and our cultural policies meant that we are now going to be dragged into foreign conflicts that we otherwise do not wish to be a part of?
No. The answer to everything that you just asked the questions regarding is it's all no's.
Why?
They're all exaggerations. They're all exaggerated responses to exaggerated situations. They're very extreme. So what you're talking about is a very worked up set of subsets of the population, right? In response to a very unique event, right? One that's very emotional for them. They're easily riled up. These are polarizing times.
Okay.
And, you know, when it comes to the Palestinian question, the Arab world, and the Muslim religion, these can have a lot of extremes attached to them, right? And that's what's playing out right now, right? This event should not be forgotten. I'm not saying it's a forgettable incident, but its impact will lessen over time, right? And the question you're asking right now, and the questions that you're basing that question on, that are being asked, and maybe should be asked, but you know, I'm not surprised again that they're being asked at this time, right? But it's not a reflection on all immigrants. It's certainly not a reflection on anyone outside of those particular communities right now, right? So there's plenty of other immigrants from plenty other parts of the world who are not out there chanting "Gas the Jews."
What's the name of the fictional country that we always used to use in our war games or in our exercises?
Kanakistan?
No. Entropians or something like that? Or
no, not Smokarians. It was something else.
I don't know. I don't know what it was.
At the time, it would have been
Fantasians.
Let's just say Fantasians. That was it.
Okay. So, let's say we have a large Fantasian diaspora in the country.
Yeah.
And Fantasia gets into a major ground conflict with Entropia. And there is also a very large Entropian diaspora or community in our nation. Now let's say that the Fantasian community is much larger. And the war effort amongst the Fantasians is being largely supported by donations and financial and, to a limited extent, some material support by the Fantasian community in Canada. Is it not, therefore, a legitimate target by the Entropians? Either by Entropian factions within Canada or the Entropian government working through those factions in Canada.
Okay, well, first of all, we're dealing with a hypothetical.
Yes, we are.
Right?
Well, actually, we're not, but I don't want to name names.
Actually, I'm going to say it out loud because at the time that we were doing this, the raison d'etre, it rapidly changed.
Yep.
But prior to that time, it was Balkan. It was Balkan.
Okay.
The mission was Balkan at the time.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
When I got in.
Yep.
Right? So, and there are documented examples of this happening again. There were Croatians, there were Croats, and Serbians who had lived side by side for years, decades, generations in Canada, gone along just fine. And they were going back to the home country, picking sides and doing horrific things to each other.
Okay. But what happens if they start doing horrific things to each other here? Well, How can you guarantee me that that's not going to happen?
I'm not going to guarantee it to you. Right? I'm not.
So then how can we continue to advocate an open-door immigration policy with multiculturalism that encourages people to retain these old grievances and these old identities? How can we say that that's a sane policy when we are flirting with such obvious disaster?
Are we? And how obvious? How obvious and how extreme?
How can you not look at crowds of people in Australia chanting "Gas the Jews" and not think that could not translate into violence in our own streets?
Because the same laziness of mind and soul that is being exhibited there in saying such a pig-ignorant fucking thing is also not going to manifest itself in any way, shape, or form. They're not going to go out and do anything to anyone. They're out there because they've got an opportunity, just like it's like this is the closest they're going to step away from the keyboard and being trolls on the keyboard, right? It's just like
are they?
It's just like the previous ones that we're looking at were I stand with Hamas, and it's just like the black movement in the U.S. Bullshit. It's not like the black movement in the U.S. And you don't stand with Hamas. You actually, because you're talking about Palestinian freedom and liberation, you actually stand with Fatah, not Hamas. Hamas is a religious organization. All right, so shut the fuck up. You're talking about how your movement is the same as your Black Lives Matter movement is the same as Palestinian liberation. Bullshit. You do not. Until you can tell me, and we were saying this a few minutes ago, until you can tell me that your people and your movement are going to strap on parachutes and paraglide into, some farming community in Utah and start slaughtering people.
So you're saying to me there's absolutely zero chance, or at least such a low chance that it's just not even worth thinking about, of ethnic violence and riots, say like what France has seen, France or Switzerland, or France or Sweden has seen.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see it here. And
why not?
Well, because
why are we more special than, say, the Swedes or the French?
Because I actually just brought up an example. We had Croats and Serbs who got along just fine, went over there, did horrific things, and came back and didn't do horrific things to each other here.
They were also a very, very, very tiny community, and they couldn't get any kind of critical mass, unlike the Arab communities in Europe.
In Europe. Not here. And in Europe, there
was a lot of critical mass demonstrated on the day of or like last week in those spontaneous air quotes protests. There was a lot of critical mass being demonstrated.
And how many of them resulted in violence?
None yet. This is what I'm saying. How can you be so confident that these diasporas are not going to be leveraged with the threat of violence? Say either you stop supporting the Entropians. Hey, Canadian government, you either stop supporting the Entropians, or we are going to use. Oh no, the Fantasians have the large diaspora.
Okay.
You either stop supporting the Entropians, or you're going to see constant riots, like on the level of the BLM protests. You're going to see constant BLM style riots within the Fantasian community that lives in every single one of your major cities.
Okay, so now we're going to take a step farther away from the conversation, right? Because all I've heard from you two guys for a year now is all about freedom of speech, blah, blah, blah. And the trucker protest, that was okay, because that was just freedom of speech, yada, yada, yada. But now, Black Lives Matter, that's not acceptable.
No, what they were saying wasn't the problem. Looting and burning, that was the problem.
Okay, but now you've got
You didn't have a lot of arson attacks going on Parliament Hill. I'm just sorry, you didn't.
Okay, so let's talk about all these people who started demonstrating the last week, right? Freedom of speech. They can do it.
Yeah, absolutely, right? They can do it.
What are you scared of?
I'm scared of, again, I didn't hear a lot of stuff coming out of, say, the trucker protest. I didn't hear a lot of stuff about saying, let's murder everyone who's vaccinated. I didn't hear any of that stuff.
No, but
I didn't hear any stuff
shit
about
on their doorsteps and call them names.
I did not
abuse
hear
them.
anything. No, okay. What you're talking about, you're trying to take what happened to maybe 25 people, and you're trying to impose that upon the entire movement. And I'm not going to let you do that. We did not hear any calls for murder.
I refuse your refusal to
murder
do that.
And genocide was never called for on the trucker protest. And for that matter, it wasn't called for in any of the Wet'suwet'en protests. Say what you want about Extinction Rebellion and how I think they're really, really annoying. And I'd love to see some of them get their heads caved in by a baseball bat from some frustrated, bus driver.
Wouldn't that be murder?
Well, yeah, it would be. So, maybe not their heads caved in, but certainly smacked around. But say what you want for them. They're not calling for anybody to die, at least not directly.
Okay.
So there is a difference. Yeah, there's a point where free speech becomes like you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Okay.
So when these guys start talking about genocide and they're openly chanting it, and they're proud of it. They're not backtracking from it. And they're getting support in other factors of the society, like academia, like the leaders of cultural institutions are not condemning this. Leaders of religious institutions, not all, but some very key ones, are not condemning it. They're couching their language, and they're trying to, we don't support, we don't advocate the murder of women and children, but in so many words, Israel had it coming. When you start seeing that language, how can you be so confident that we're just going to continue to live in our peaceful little kumbaya bubble?
I have said almost exactly what you said just now. You've described these other people saying, right? But I've been very careful to give it the appropriate context along the way.
Right.
All right. And again, innocent until proven guilty, right? There is nothing. And these are all individual liberties we are talking about, right? Frankly, I'm surprised to hear you saying you can't yell fire in it.
No, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong.
It's usually me who's saying with the freedom of speech
don't get me wrong.
responsibility.
I'm not against protest.
Yeah.
That's not what
It's
I'm
not
saying.
Even protest, the demonstration.
Yeah, I'm not saying that that's what's being questioned.
Yeah.
Like I'm not making this condemnation. I am not at all saying that people are questioning the right to protest.
Yeah.
No. I'm saying that people are questioning immigration.
I know.
Should we have allowed immigration and the view of assimilation? Even in countries like only Canada has multiculturalism as an official policy, but it is often held up in other countries as a model. It is often proposed by the left in Europe as saying, look, the reason why we have a hard time assimilating immigrants is because, they're saying you can't assimilate immigrants. We should be adopting a policy of multiculturalism. It is often held up by the pro-immigration side as the way to go. And this event has caused it to come into question, or at least I think it always was being questioned. You were forbidden to speak about it. And now people are openly speaking about it, questioning the wisdom of it. Not protests. It is, should we have had open door immigration in the first place? And for the people we do allow into Canada, should we have multiculturalism, or should we be preaching a melting pot? Should we abandon the salad bowl and go for the melting pot?
I think I would argue, first of all, that Europe, Western Europe, France in particular, if we're using that as an example, right, it has neither the mosaic, the assimilated mosaic, nor the
melting pot,
right? It doesn't have multiculturalism, doesn't have assimilation, right? It has ghettoization, and that's what it does. It doesn't allow for the integration of these communities. It keeps them segregated.
It's really
right, and so
you really got to wonder if immigration is compatible with the nation state. I don't think any country other than the neo-Europes of basically Australia, New Zealand, America, Canada, and with a possible addition maybe of South Africa, can sustain immigration. I don't think a nation state can sustain it.
Well, I mean, it's
like mass immigration, it can't. I just don't see any example around the world of anyone that's ever any nation state that has successfully pursued mass immigration.
Well, I think it can be a number of factors dovetailing the planet's being right. If you look at it, I think ironically, though there was some racism involved, right? We had Ukrainians, Poles, Germans come to this nation. And it wasn't. I mean, it was.
Yes,
it was a problem in its own way.
But Canada has always been Canada's never been a nation state. Always, right from the get-go, there's the duality of Anglo-Franco, and if you're going to go further than that, Anglo-Franco-Celt.
Well, plus we don't have.
Canada was never England.
We never had.
Canada was never Scotland. Canada was never Ireland.
And we never had centuries upon centuries. You're right.
Yeah.
I won't necessarily equate that necessarily with being a nation state. It's more like being this ongoing culture that has fluctuated and changed.
But it has always, right from the get-go, has had multiple national or multiple tribes, so to speak.
Yeah.
We always had, first of all, we always had the presence of the duality, not the duality, how would you say, the multiplicity of the First Nations. You were never dealing with just the Iroquois. And I'm going way back to the time of Cartier.
Yeah.
You were never dealing with just the Huron. There were, even within the Iroquois itself, it was a confederacy of 6 nations.
Yeah.
There was always a multitude of political actors, ethnic actors on the scene.
Yeah.
You always had, yes, there was the overall suzerainty and hegemony of the English, but that only lasted for a couple of decades before it was actively challenged by Scots, Quebecers, Irish immigrants. So Canada always had these mechanisms from the get-go, whereas a place like France never did.
Yeah.
A place like Poland, Japan, South Korea, Norway, they don't have those mechanisms.
Saying they never did is bullshit, right?
Okay.
So just imagine 1,000 years from now, there's going to be 3 guys sitting around. They're going to be talking about Canada the same way we talk about Britain right now.
Okay.
Okay. Because Britain, right now, we think of it, well, at most, its diversity is the Welsh, the English, the Scots.
Oh, no.
Right?
I would not say that at all.
Right?
I would say Britain is an incredibly diverse society. Massively diverse. Go to London. Show me one ethnic community in the world that doesn't have over 1,000 people in London. Show me one. Maybe Inuit. Thank you. The defense rests.
Well, no, because now I think I'm trying to wrap my head around. I think you're arguing against yourself.
No,
now.
I'm saying that Britain isn't. I'm not saying they're doing it successfully. I'm saying they're doing it, and I'm not saying anybody's happy with it, and I'm not saying it's a strength. I'm saying they are a very diverse society.
My point was going to be this.
Okay.
All right. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I need to artificially rewind until back into the interwar era, before all the
age of mass immigration,
all the immigration to the mother country, right? Prior to that, you could have looked at that and gone, if you'd gone back 1,000 years, you said instead of all these white people, right, there would have been a whole bunch of different white people.
I noticed like the disdain white people. Yeah.
No, there was no disdain intended.
White people.
So,
they keep showing up with that skin.
At one time, it was Celts, right?
Yep.
Then the freaking Romans showed up, right? And there were 2 or 3 different types of Celts at the time,
sure.
right? And then you had the Jutes and the Saxons and the Angles.
But it became the nation state of England.
And by that time, all of those peoples had assimilated. My argument is just this: that 1,000 years from now, people might just look at Canada and go talk about it the same way. Right? So the things that you're talking about that make Canada different right now, right? Maybe Canada's a nation state in that way 1,000 years from now.
So we just got to go through several centuries of bloodshed and conquest.
I think actually I would argue that because Canada it's kind of a new experiment.
Yeah.
Right. And the closest thing to it is actually Australia, not the U.S. The U.S. was a different experiment.
Yeah.
So,
but again, that's what I'm saying, that Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and America.
Yeah.
For sure. Maybe South Africa. But for sure, those nations are conglomerates of multiple different peoples, all kind of coming together and making a go of it at the same time.
Yeah.
They started at very finite points on the calendar. And then out of necessity, they had those mechanisms baked into the cake, because otherwise they never would have survived the elements, with the technology of the 19th century. Those conditions don't exist anywhere else in the world, with maybe some exceptions, perhaps in Latin America. You could maybe make an argument that, say, like Argentina. Or Central America, like the various nations of Latin America, Brazil, maybe they had those same structures in place. I would assume so, but I can't say comment definitively. But I can't tell you any place in any other country, in other words, a nation state, which has those mechanisms. I just don't see how mass immigration, you can make it work in a place like Germany, a place like Japan, a place like Nigeria. It's just not going to work. India. It's just not going to work. At least not peaceably.
Yeah, I agree with you that we've been lucky here in that I think there's been, and it's really, again, this is all relative. It's on a sliding scale. I'm going to put two words together that probably don't belong together. It's a relative chauvinism, a positive chauvinism, if you want. That Canadianism, as a nationalism, is inherently self-deprecating, or it has been, right? And that, I think, is where the whole concept of multiculturalism comes in, because that's how we've looked at ourselves. Look at us. Aren't we great? Aren't we polite? Aren't we nice to each other? Aren't we nice to other people of the world, right? And I think one of the things that we need to be very careful of our self-perception as we go through this exercise is, okay, what is really changing here, right? Because I think there's two streams of thought coming together with this immigration concept. One is we've done all right up until now, right? Until lately. I'd say let's say till 2012.
Yeah.
Right? And that's before this whole social media and polarization, and everybody can have an opinion, put it out there, and find an echo chamber, and we just got the loonies, the extreme loonies are out there, right? That's part of it. The other thing is the immigration patterns nowadays are visible minorities, and this is where we need to be really careful. Right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I would agree with that.
Are we pushing back simply because of this? And I will tell you this, right? I was raised non-racist. I don't consider myself a racist. I will tell you.
Except for white people.
I will tell you. And the first time I experienced this, I may have described this to you. I went into Chinatown in Vancouver with my friend from Hong Kong.
Yep.
And I looked around after about 3 minutes, and I realized I was the only white person for 2 blocks.
Yep.
And that place was crowded as fuck. And I was like,
damn, son.
Wow, this feels weird. Right? Last year, we were in the Lower Mainland in Surrey. I went to a shopping mall in Surrey. Everyone working there. And I'm going to say 95% of the patrons, East Indian.
Oh, yeah.
All from the Indian subcontinent.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And again, so my girlfriend and I were 2 of the 4 people in sight who
weren't obviously of that community.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, was I disturbed? No.
What's the difference between that and French ghettoization?
I can't speak to that right now. I would suggest that there's a difference, but I have nothing to base that on right now. Okay.
Neither do I.
I would say
neither do I. I just thought it was worth asking.
Off the top of my head, I would suggest that there's probably a standard of living difference.
But is it not also ghettoization? Like, what's the difference between, say, Surrey and Hammarkullen in Gothenburg?
I don't know, because I probably passed through Hammarkullen, but
I mean, say some of the problems that they're facing in Scandinavia with ghettos, or not just Scandinavia, Europe. Like, look at remember the Charlie Hebdo attacks?
Yeah,
how they originated out of some neighborhood in was it Antwerp, or was it?
I think it was Brussels.
Brussels, yeah. Where they're ghettos, and like the talk in Europe of no-go zones.
Yeah.
What is the difference in practical terms between that and, say, a place like Dearborn, Michigan, or Surrey?
Surrey isn't a no-go zone.
I was going to say, that's the obvious thing. Surrey is not a no-go zone.
There's no violence.
Yeah. Right.
They're not viilent places.
So anyway.
That is a very, very important distinction.
In fact, a better parallel might be Mill Woods, right? Because, Mill Woods has never been...
Mill Woods is pretty diverse, though.
Yeah.
It has.
But Mill Woods is monoculture.
Mill Woods has never been been a no-go zone, but Millwood, there's been a lot of minority gang crime in Millwoods.
Millwoods is a no-go zone, if only because the roads are fucking twisty and named. You can't find yourself
You can't find it.
Can't find your way around. Like
we've said, it's not that the police get ambushed; the police get lost.
Millbourne Road, Millwoods Road, Southwood. Yeah. Which one am I supposed to? Where am I?
It was code to keep all you savage Northsiders out.
Well, you know what? It worked.
I was a Southsider at the time.
I grew up in Millwoods. So.
I lived very briefly in Millwoods, and it was it took a while to figure out. Like once you know your way around.
Yeah,
but it does take a while to figure that out.
Getting back to the question, I think that's again, I think all the questions you asked, they're not invalid, but I think time will tell them to be tempest in a teacup. Every single one of them. Right now, everybody asking those questions, everyone experiencing the emotion, because everyone's going through an emotional time right now. Everyone's going through some shit. And that's all this is.
I really hope so. Brother, I really hope so, because that would be an ugly, 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 ugly thing.
Oh, and there's ugly things being said, right? And there's because
ugly things being said, but I'm much more worried about ugly things being done.
Because of the layers of the onion, that's why the ugliness. And that's why it's like I said, it's a perfect storm. The stars are aligned. People are getting out there and doing this thing. Maybe it was coordinated, maybe it wasn't. I don't care. Right? I find the things being said distasteful. But it's not like we haven't heard groups of white guys, maybe not as many groups, not at all the same time, saying gas the Jews. Right? I mean, it's a horrific thing to say. And strangely, these are the same guys who said that the Jews were never gassed in the first place, right?
Yeah, except for me, the big difference between that is if you round up all the white guys who said, gas them, even they were never gassed, but if they were gassed, it was a good thing. Round them all up, they'll fit on this property. Whereas there were tens of thousands of people flooding out onto the streets with Palestinian flags in support of those attacks.
Yeah.
That's what and to me, that's what's new. That's the thing that
that's what really struck me as well. Yeah. It was just a number.
These are the times we live in. When we think about the event itself, and again, I had to do the math. When I looked at the per capita, we're talking like at least this is 8 9/11s per capita.
Yeah,
that just been inflicted on Israel. It's massive.
Yeah, it's a huge thing.
And just their response already, and everything's all about Israel right now and what's going on there, and everyone's picking sides and saying stupid and ignorant things. Like the worst are what's coming out of academia right now. The ones who are supporting, like the stuff we're seeing, the stuff that's supporting Hamas is like, you know what? Fucking think about what you're saying. Right. And know why you're saying
thinking about things is not really big in academia.
Well, it's like I said,
conscious thought is not really high on their agenda.
It's not big at either end of the spectrum.
I'm just saying, consider the source. If you're asking for rational, intelligent, discourse to come out of a university, I think I got a better chance of.
I would argue that at one point you could have expected that.
At one point, but maybe 60 years ago. But for the last 40 years, take the dumbest friggin' people on the street, and, they're still smarter than like half the faculty at the average university. I'm sorry.
Well, I would suggest at best that's a low bar, because I don't have a lot of faith in the intellectual capacity of the man on the street. Sorry, man on the street, if you're listening.
Sorry, man on the street. Was it the?
So you don't have faith in anybody's intellectual capacity? Or?
What was it the guy said? He would rather be governed by the first 500 names of the Boston phone book than by the Harvard faculty? Or
That sounds like a Kevin Williamson thing, I think. Or something.
Yeah, or maybe it was Bill Buckley who said that.
Yeah.
But at any rate, okay.
William F. Buckley? We're going back to Bill Buckley now? Oh, my God. There's a name I haven't heard in like...
Oh, you can never get away from Bill Buckley. Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Although
it could have gone a year without Bill Buckley coming up.
It could have been.
Buckley's been mentioned before.
Has he?
So anyway, before we got on this, I think, Steve, you wanted to talk about, say, the military ramifications of this, or the military aspect of this. So please.
Back to Israel.
Yeah. Open that one up.
Well, so the Israeli Defense Forces are preparing the ground in the American fashion by using the Air Force first. I was just watching, actually, while you guys were talking last, I was just watching some videos that were coming up on the National Post website of there were some airstrikes going on Yeah, now it's doing the sea level.
Yeah.
But so they're dropping some buildings that they think are Hamas strong points. Yeah. They've blown up a couple mosques, which they knew had weapons in them, and they were proved right because there were a lot of secondaries what they did.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay.
So so they're preparing the ground, but we all know there's going to be a ground invasion of
Gaza.
Of Gaza.
Yep.
And it's gonna be a tough fucking slog.
Yeah, I mean,
Gaza has
urban warfare.
Gaza has, at its thinnest, the population density of Manhattan, and in some places it's worse than Kowloon.
Wow.
So it's dense. It's an urban fight. Hamas has had since 2005 to prepare the ground, and they have been.
Yep. But it's not like they've been spending that whole time preparing for this.
I think they've been definitely preparing for Israeli incursions.
They've been preparing. And there have been Israeli
incursions.
Not the
whole place at once.
Not the whole place at once.
We're not talking Fallujah here.
No, but they have been preparing for incursions definitely along the frontiers.
Yeah.
So, and you can only prepare so many places, and we're talking about this since like at least 2007.
And
it's going to be definitely the Israelis aren't just going to roll in. No way.
And to add to the difficulties, Hamas has constructed an extensive network of tunnels, which the Israelis didn't discover until 2016.
Yeah.
Right, and it goes connecting all of Gaza. You know, so add to the difficulty. Like for example, when you rubble a building, you make it better cover and better concealment. Yeah. Add to that there's still a tunnel connecting the bottom of that building to other buildings that haven't been rubbled and other places that haven't been rubbled. This is going to be a bloody slog. And Israel's got a timeline. This is one thing I've been listening to Western commentators. Is Israel's got a timeline. Back in 2016, when their last major Gaza incursion, they had basically 32 days before the American government started putting pressure on them to withdraw.
Right.
They probably don't even have that long this time.
Probably not.
Before
it is a Democratic president and a Democratic.
Now,
what's the other house?
The Senate.
Senate. Yeah.
Now the President Biden came out with a very, very strong statement in support of Israel. Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, also issued a very strong statement after being shown, I guess, pictures of dead and mutilated infant corpses and stuff like that, and just. But then the day after Biden gave his statement, he gave another statement, which kind of was moderating it.
Yeah.
So
exactly, saying like, "Okay, Israel, don't go apeshit."
So yeah.
I can still see. I mean, this is nothing. I mean, 2016 was nothing compared to this. Like the reasons for going in, right?
No.
So in that respect, you might
right.
well be able to.
You think Israel will have a longer leash?
Israel's motivation. Yeah. Israel's motivation is certainly stronger. This is definitely going to be a much larger incursion than the one in Gaza. Like the one in 2016 was basically about one soldier, I think, was kidnapped and then executed. And then there's the issue with all the hostages Hamas took. And Hamas is saying, okay, well, if you do an incursion, we're going to live stream the executions of these hostages. And I'm worried more that they're going to be used as bait, as in the intelligence will be linked about the locations of hostages, and then the buildings will be
wired to blow.
Yeah, like they're gonna and it'll take, because it's a full building. We don't know where in the building or whatever is. You'll end up with like a platoon plus of Israeli special forces and a company doing an outer corridor, and then you're just gonna drop the building on their SF and their right, like, and drop multiple buildings. And
it's a viable tactic,
right? Like,
because it might work.
Yeah,
maybe.
And it's gonna,
if Israel takes the bait.
Yeah.
Israel has a history. I mean, they haven't really gone out to any great desire to rescue specific hostages since Entebbe.
Yeah, but their policy officially has been like no one left behind.
And for obvious reasons.
Yeah, but I think that's the corpses, right?
Yeah, the Israeli government, I think they've already written off those hostages.
I would suspect so.
Everything I'm seeing is saying that they're saying like we can't negotiate with them when we're at war with them.
Yeah, no,
and this is, from my experience, limited and purely anecdotal. This is kind of the understanding.
Yeah.
amongst Israelis that if you're taken hostage, be it on a plane, on a cruise ship, or even something like this where you're kidnapped, you're not coming back.
Yeah,
like a rescue mission is a recovery mission.
Yeah,
you will not come out of it alive, no matter what your government does. You are already dead.
Yeah. But like the fight for Gaza is an urban fight. It is. What I've learned being an avid listener to the Urban Warfare Project podcast, is that at a minimum, urban warfare requires 4 times the rations, 4 times the ammo, 4 times the water, 4 times the fuel.
Yep. On the
versus conventional operations like what you're seeing in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Right.
Like conventional field operations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a very resource intensive. That's up. A very resource intensive form of combat. It's the Hamas is on the defensive. The advantage is always with the defender.
Yep.
The IDF, like as a whole, massively outnumbers the number of fighters that Hamas can bring to bear. But the amount of combat power that the Israelis can actually bring to bear on Gaza probably brings those numbers a lot closer to parity than anyone would like. Certainly, they're probably not gonna make the 3-to-1 ratio attacker to defender that you want to make.
You have to take it building by building. But here's my question.
So what do they do?
What's the end game? This is the question. Why are they going in there at all? Right? Because my first thought is if you separate out the hostages as a concept, as an element to the thinking, the way you were describing it, drop all the buildings, let them have their tunnels, fuck them, right? And just that all that takes is an air and artillery campaign.
Yep.
Right. Obviously, that's not where they're going, because they're considering going in by ground, right?
Well,
to what end? Is it to raid? Absolutely destroy Hamas? Is it to
that's what they promised,
take control of the territory and install some sort of governance until they can self-govern themselves?
I'm wondering. I personally have never been a big believer in the 2-state solution. I've always thought that finding a way for Arabs to live within Israel with citizenship rights is a more sustainable solution than having 2 very small countries who really hate each other.
So you're saying
I'm wondering if
have the Israelis not tried occupation already and found it to be unsustainable?
Well, like you said,
they might have had better
where
results
they have citizenship, right? Yeah. I think relatively speaking, the results were better.
Yeah,
and I mean, it probably needs another generation.
Because they were looking at, like, they left in 2005 before Hamas was elected, and they just essentially walled it off and said this is the border. And then every once in a while there would be a small incursion into what they called mowing the lawn. When tall piece stuck up and just cut it off, and that was it. And so they thought that was working right up until last weekend. So I think their thinking has fundamentally changed about what there is. So I'm wondering if they decide, like, look, we can't leave this place to govern itself anymore, and the cost of occupation might be more worth bearing, right? And if you take the whole thing and just say, okay, this is Israel now, and
you have to take it to occupy it, right?
That's true. You're right.
Unless they've been training in urban warfare all this time.
Well, they have been.
Is their army big enough to take on? It's like
you're looking at a maximum force size of about 300,000 people. But
and the amount of time that would take, I don't think Israel can. I mean, it's not just the short leash the Americans put them on.
Yeah.
How long can a country as small as Israel maintain full mobilization?
Yeah. And there's another thing. Perun was pointing this out in his video they released earlier this morning. The Americans actually pre-position equipment in Israel that they retain legal custody ownership of, and then as soon as Israelis need a transfer of arms or whatever, they just here's the keys, sign the paper, here's the keys and the stuff. Yeah. They've been raiding that stash for Ukraine.
So something that I truly, honestly believe is coming out of this. Okay, let me preface this. It's pretty much broadly accepted that the Iranians are the larger power backing Hamas.
Yeah, they have to be. So we're talking about who's pulling the strings, who benefits.
The question is,
now shit gets
is the Russians go to the Iranians with Hamas?
100%.
Right?
Yeah. 100%. So the Russians say, okay, they look at the ground in August. They see where this is going.
Yeah.
They know that this ends badly for them, that they cannot stop the Ukrainians in what they're doing. It's only a matter of time before the Ukrainians make the Sea of Azov and the Russians lose Crimea.
Yeah.
They know that this is going to happen, that they cannot stop it. Okay, Iran, we need you to open up a second front. We need you to do this. And the Iranians say, well, yeah, but why? What's in this for me? And the Russians say, we know you guys really want a nuclear option and you can't get it on your own. We can give it to you. We can give you that technology.
You think that's what's in play?
That's what I think is the carrot. Or the Russians are offering some kind of military technology that the Iranians cannot otherwise get. They're not just going to build fighter planes and give it to them. They're going to give them some kind of technology that, I mean, because the Iranians could get fighter jets from the Chinese if they wanted to. They could get fighter jets from a variety of sources. Mm-hmm. It's something that the Iranians desperately covet that they cannot get through any other means, and I only think of that as some kind of nuclear technology.
Well, I think that
what about we were talking earlier before we turned the mics on? What about the recce by electronic warfare technology?
Could be, yeah. You know what? I'm sure the Iranians are interested in a variety of things that the Russians can provide, not just nuke. Although I think nuke could probably be the crown jewel.
'Cause the narrative on the conservative right is that the Obama deal and that Trump suspended and then Biden put in place is a roadmap for Iran to get nuclear bomb anyway. Mm-hmm. Just it maybe delayed it by a decade.
Yeah,
I think Iran is already benefiting from what's happened.
How so?
Well, the timing was interesting. Now, I think the primary timing was probably again religious because there were some Jewish. Festivals going on.
Well, Yom Kippur, right?
Mm-hmm. But the Saudis were in town looking to normalize relations with Israel.
Okay.
Yeah.
In the days leading up. And I think politically and within the Arab and Muslim world, this, again, it polarizes things. Because the two rivals are Iran and Saudi.
Right.
Yeah.
So Iran gets to give Saudi a bit of a black eye, stirs the pot, gets people looking at the Israeli thing.
But they could also be losing their proxies in the region.
Yeah.
I mean, they are facing the very real possibility that this is now the excuse Israel needs to eradicate Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Yeah.
And completely smash Hamas in Gaza.
Well, I think they're probably ready to write off Hamas.
But that doesn't seem like a lot of gain for me. Like, I don't think that the juice is worth that squeeze for the Iranians.
On the other hand, I don't think Hamas is doing them much at all because Hamas isn't actually them, right?
Like the Iranians,
yeah. I mean, they're the ones. They're the puppet.
They're the proxy.
They're pulling the strings right now.
Hamas provides the meat, but Iran provides the leadership.
But Hamas isn't Shiite.
No, they're
so
not.
Probably,
they're Sunni.
Probably has not always been tied in with Iran as strongly as on this operation, right?
And of course, this is the great problem for the Iranians in that Hamas is more than happy to take Iranian money and is more than happy to take Iranian training and is more than happy to take the benefits of the Iranian support.
Which was probably thousands of missiles because those weren't built in Gaza basements.
Yeah, exactly. But let's say Hamas ever achieves something akin to victory conditions. And let's say Hamas is able to seize the entirety of the Negev desert and link up with the West Bank and create one contiguous Palestinian authority. Let's say they get to rule it. Mm-hmm. Like, best case scenario for Hamas.
Yeah.
They're not going to obey Iranian writ. They won't.
Exactly. So
they will never, ever accept Iranian hegemony over the region.
This event is a one-stop deal. It's done. right? Hamas has shot its wad, and Iran knows that, right? It would have known that going into this.
So,
right?
Yeah, I just don't see any benefit for Iran
politically,
other than a deal with Russia.
It's getting a deal with Russia. This definitely serves Russia, right?
Oh,
but
yeah.
part of what it gets
100%.
out of it stirs up the Arab world.
It distracts American aid.
Yeah.
Yep.
But from Iran's point of view, it stirs the pot with Saudi.
Yeah, it disrupts the Saudi peace process, and one of the larger motivations for Israeli going into Gaza is because now the Saudis have to be wondering in the peace process with the Israelis, did they back the wrong horse? Because the Israelis just got snookered.
Really bloody nose.
Yeah.
Interesting
So
well, it depends.
So
it depends on how this plays out.
So if it fatally disrupts the peace process with Saudi, that's a benefit for Iran. That's probably worth the squeeze.
How so?
Well,
so
because
let's say this disrupts the peace process.
Riyadh and Tel Aviv are the Middle Eastern superpowers as far as military capability, right?
Yeah.
Both supplied very heavily, obviously, by the Americans.
Yeah.
So if those two can't work together anymore, and they've actually been working together back channel for quite a while, for over a decade, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, if you can openly cooperate with each other, that streamlines things and makes things easier.
And it makes
right?
definitely a united front against Iranian incursions.
Right. So that's to Iran's advantage. It disrupted.
Okay, so play this out. What does this look like in 5 years? What does this look like in 10? Let's say the Iranian-Israeli accord or kind of de facto cooperation is severed. Saudi-Israeli cooperation is ceased. What does this look like in 5 years?
Well, if I may, I'm going to turn that on its head. Let's say it succeeds. Let's say Saudi and Israel normalize relations. Then the Muslim world is looking at the country that has Mecca and Medina, the two holiest cities in Islam, normalizing relations with Israel.
Well, let's say not normalizing, because again, that would be very, very difficult for the kingdom to maintain. But let's say a de facto cooperation.
Yeah.
But like behind closed doors, official hostility, official disdain, but unofficial behind the curtains cooperation.
They had an official member of the Saudi government going to Israel. I think it was to Israel. That or they were meeting with Israelis in the U.S. I can't remember in the last 2 weeks.
Okay,
right.
But that's different than say like.
But this is out in the open.
Okay. Well, yeah,
you know what I mean?
but
so if that's happening, then the other the Shia part of the Muslim world is going. We're going to lose a lot of support if the Holy Land is saying Israel's not so bad after all. We're starting on that.
That's
down that
not
road.
new in that Sadat addressed the Knesset. I mean, yeah, he was assassinated by Egyptian hardliners, but from that moment on, Egypt has openly cooperated with Israel in several things.
That's not Saudi Arabia.
No, and Jordan has openly cooperated with the Israelis in several issues.
Yeah, but it's been westernized the whole time. We're talking about Saudi Arabia. We're talking about home of the two holy cities.
It's not the craziest. Like it's not like earth shattering.
Well, if you're from Iran's perspective, I think, and you can avoid having to try and shoot down Israeli warplanes coming from one direction and Saudi warplanes coming from another direction.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Coming from across the Gulf,
right. Like I mean, Saudi doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon anymore.
Nobody does.
Than Israel does.
Yeah, nobody does.
So those, immediately the bulk of those intelligence focuses, if they have a formal peace accord, they're very heavily concentrated on Iran and keeping Iran in check, if not eventually actually going to war with them.
Well, what do you think Iran's goals in the Middle East are? Short term.
That's a tough one. They're hard to read. The Iranians are really hard to read.
Like
right?
I do think they want
regional hegemony.
Yeah, they definitely want,
and so that's they're fighting. Them and the Saudis are tugging.
They definitely want control over They want to protect the Alawite dynasty in Syria.
Yeah.
And maintain de facto control over Syria, which would, I believe, give them a land bridge to Hezbollah.
Yes.
Like they've been trying to support Hezbollah, but they haven't had a contiguous corridor towards them.
Well, they've got Iraq in the way.
I believe, doesn't Iran have a border with Syria?
No.
But yes, Iraq is a big part
Although
of it.
Iraq is predominantly
southern Iraq, that's not Kurdistan.
Southern Iraq is, and the current government is predominantly Shiite dominated.
And pretty pro-Iranian right now, yeah.
And the Iranians that's also a part of it. The Iranians are absolutely working very closely with the Iraqis to try and bring Iraq into its sphere. And so then that gives them that corridor from Saudi, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, a continuous corridor of power from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. So I would say that's definitely part of Iran's goals. That they want to become the regional power, but I think that's how they want to become the regional power, by establishing those countries as an Iranian-dominated bloc. I also suspect that theologically, the Iranians want to be seen as leaders of the entire Muslim world.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying on both those fronts.
Yeah, to promote the Shiite
politically,
faith
militarily,
over Sunni.
religiously, they are at odds with Riyadh.
So I think that's kind of their short-term goal as to what they want to do. But then this attack very much jeopardizes that.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't think so. I don't think so.
I mean, this is definitely. I mean, Hezbollah is now in play, and this is now the excuse that the Israelis need to obliterate them, which they never had before.
Hezbollah hasn't done a lot for Iran lately.
Oh yeah, not the way they are participating in this war.
Yeah, but not the way they were achieving things back in the 80s, right? Like they were a big name, and Lebanon was in the news, and you know what they were achieving. Think of what was concerning you half an hour ago when we were talking all about all these people who were going out there and demonstrating.
Yeah.
Right now, what's the effect on the Arab world, the Muslim world, when now, as we're already seeing, they're already seeing Arab Palestinian kids, bodies, buildings being blown to shit by the Israelis, right? So now the Saudis are in a difficult position because they were about to shake hands with these guys in some way, shape, or form, right? That benefits the Iranians far more than having a Hezbollah sitting there.
Obliterated.
Right? Yeah. The Revolutionary Guard's going to be able to replace bodies in Hezbollah, right? Hamas is probably written off.
No, I don't think they can replace the Hezbollah.
Yeah.
Because the IRC or the IRG does not have the knowledge and the intrinsic presence in southern Lebanon that Hezbollah does. They don't know the ground. Like, they're foreigners. Any more than, say, the United States could potentially replace the bodies of the Mexican Federal Army, but they can't replace their local know-how in a place like Oaxaca province, right? So
I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's a fair amount of Revolutionary Guard embedded.
Yeah, but again, they're not Arabs.
But any
right?
fight the Israelis have against Hezbollah will not be a cakewalk, because Hezbollah is full of peoples who spent the last half a decade, because they were fighting ISIS as hard as the Americans were.
Yeah,
and they got a lot of combat experienced people who were fighting ISIS.
But again, they never faced the full brunt of Israeli,
That's right.
For the next 30 days
in Mosul, they had that, didn't they? There was a revolutionary guy they actually traded for some.
Yeah, I think so. In that movie, I haven't watched it
because they were all up against ISIS.
Yeah. There's for the next 30 days, Israel can take the gloves off and do pretty much whatever, at the very least, the next 14 days.
Yeah,
Israel can do whatever the hell it wants.
Yeah,
its adversaries have never ever faced a completely unrestrained Israel before, and I don't just mean
not since
unrestrained.
67.
Well, 73.
And I don't just mean unrestrained what the United States is going to allow them to do, what the Israeli population will allow them to do. Yeah. The biggest form of restraint on Israeli military power has been domestic Israeli politics and the Israeli peace movement, which is now off the table.
Yeah.
Off the table.
Well, I think it's what they allow themselves to do.
Yeah, and now
because in a lot of ways they're only going to give so many shits about what the rest of the world thinks now. Now that's going to change over time, but
for the next few days, somewhere between 14 and 30 days, Israel is completely off the leash.
Which means what I'm actually going to be very interested to see, which I think is going to be the critical piece, is how they conduct the ground war. What are their aims and how do they go about it? Yeah. And how many casualties are they about to sustain doing it?
Yeah. That's why I don't know if there's going to be much of a ground war.
That's what I'm wondering as well. They seem to be lining up for it, but
I can see raids.
And people keep talking about tanks. What are you doing with tanks going into an urban war?
I mean, tanks are essential in the urban war.
Yeah, they're absolutely essential.
But there's only so much of them. Maybe it's just because people are just talking about tanks, right? You need way more ground troops than you do.
Yeah. But tanks are, we're finding in Ukraine, that tanks aren't indispensable. We used to think that tanks were incompatible with urban warfare.
They're actually,
and we're finding out that they're actually invaluable.
Yeah.
In the same way that they were in Ortona. Yeah. In that you just keep the tank out of range of the infantry handheld weapons, or in a place where they cannot be struck by infantry handheld weapons.
Yeah.
Say firing out a window. But it's that survivability and that direct fire option.
The big gun, Because if you got a machine gun nest behind a wall and you can't take it out with small arms fire, that's what the tank gun is for.
That's where the tank comes rolling up, and you've got 122 or 120 millimeters of problem solving.
Yeah. They're absolutely invaluable in urban warfare.
And this is where
they're vulnerable, but they're invaluable.
Yeah, but you can employ them in such a way, they're not out the tip of the spear. Your infantry is.
Yeah.
And then you only bring up the tank for that one shot, and then you pull it back.
Yeah.
And this is where everybody laughed when the Russians were bringing out T-55s and T-62s unmodified. Well, that's how they're employing them.
Yeah, as infantry support tanks.
Yeah.
As opposed to there's a difference.
Not as MBTs.
We were showing. I had the picture of the M10 Booker there. Mm-hmm. That is an infantry support tank. It is not a main battle tank.
Yeah,
right.
That's not going toe to toe with a T90.
No,
at least if it can avoid it.
If it can avoid it, yeah. It is meant as a direct fire support vehicle for infantry.
Yeah. But when they were fighting in Bakhmut, and they send out the Storm Z convicts. Just identify where the Ukrainian strong points are. Then at that point, you bring up the T-55 at the very 2 kilometers at the very maximum range of the gun. That's the target. Hit it. Pull back.
Yeah.
Well, you do the exact same thing, in the urban warfare.
And then inside, because they were talking about what the hell was that tank? The T-80, but with the anti-aircraft turret on it.
Yep.
I can't remember.
Yep.
They're talking about because the Russians found in Grozny that their most valuable weapon was actually a Zu-23. Mm-hmm. Because targets in the high rises in Grozny, main battle tanks couldn't elevate their guns high enough. I was
thinking exactly that.
And they couldn't react quick enough. But a Zu-23, which is an anti-aircraft system, had a turret that traversed very, very quickly because it was designed to keep up with supersonic air.
Straight up,
and it could fire at virtually any angle. Yeah. And they found the Zu-23 was actually the most valuable weapon they had in fighting in urban combat in Grozny. Yeah. And so that's what that...
a Gepard would be very handy.
Because you don't always need 105 or 120 millimeters. Sometimes a 40 mil is enough to punch through that wall. A 25 or a 40 is enough to punch through the wall to get what you need.
How much you want to bet that Klaus Maffei is going to get is working right now on a second generation Gepard?
Well, they better be.
Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Some engineers are burning a midnight oil. But anyway, I digress on that. I don't know if Israel will do a massive major invasion. I can see an incursion. I can see raids. Kind of like how the American army did those thunder runs into Baghdad in the first Iraq war. But I don't see a long-term presence simply because it would require too much blood, too much treasure.
Yeah. I think they have to...
I think they will go in with very, very specific and defined objectives, and they're based on destruction.
Yeah.
That they're going in to destroy something and then leaving. They're not going to hold and pacify.
Yeah, so the question is if they keep their promise that they're hoping to destroy Hamas completely and render it completely unable to, in the future, ever harm Israel again. That's a pretty big promise.
That's a pretty big promise. And
to,
I think
to keep, if you're not going to occupy Gaza for the rest of...
You just destroy the infrastructure.
Yeah, but then they can rebuild it.
Yeah, then you destroy it again.
Yeah.
That's cheaper than occupation as well.
Yeah, I suppose.
The infrastructure of what? The
power lines, utilities.
Or the infrastructure of Hamas.
Yeah,
well, but it's the same thing.
Right now, it's the same.
Same thing.
The problem is if you're destroying like utilities, like you say, then now you're the one who's responsible for permanently immiserating Gaza, as opposed to Hamas.
Or maybe you don't destroy it all. You just destroy it in the areas that Hamas needs as springboards for Israel. Like you further constrict.
No, I think Steve's right, but they have declared out loud that they are destroying Hamas.
Yeah,
well, they're not going to stop until they do. So that's,
how do they do that? And also, how much of that is simply just for
just rhetoric?
But
true enough.
But having said it, they're not going to save face if they don't pull it off. So they need to come out with something tangible they can point to. So it's taking out the leadership, taking out the bodies, taking out the equipment.
And definitely that's true. And I also think that there has to be a mass casualty component to this. You have to establish a deterrent with the people of Gaza.
Well, they're already experiencing it.
Oh no, this is nothing. They have to. I mean, they're going to have to stack the bodies 10 deep. They're going to have to obliterate. Like I'm talking.
I don't want us to be saying that out loud because
horrible amount of collateral damage has to be inflicted on Gaza.
I don't feel comfortable saying that out loud because I don't want us. I don't like the sound of those words.
Nobody
coming out of our
does,
mouths,
but I just don't see Israel taking any other
I don't
path
because that's
genocide.
That's a criminal move.
Yeah, it is 100%. But again, the Israelis do not think that way. They don't think the way we do. They see themselves in an existential, not just right now, but in a perpetual state of existential threat.
Yeah, but they are walking a fine line, and we've talked about world opinion.
I think they got to have some carrot with their stick somewhere that we're not seeing yet.
Yeah,
right. Like even if they incrementally pacify and take Gaza, so block by block, we're incorporating this block into Israel now, and now these Gazans
yourself are on a timeline.
I don't know, but if these Gazans who we've now this block of Gazans who we've secured this, we've moved the fence. You're in Israel. Here's school. Here's power. Here's electricity. Here's water. Here's welfare. I don't know.
I think they tried that.
I can't imagine them.
Well, I can't imagine them allowing them full Israeli citizenship and participation in the Israeli political process.
Well, maybe they don't. But if your option is being immiserated and constantly like skulking around the ruins of a former city.
No, I mean, I can't see the Israelis desiring that end product. The Israelis have a hard enough time assimilating Jewish immigrants.
Yeah.
Let alone radical Palestinian immigrants.
Well, like I said, by the time we convene again, I'm sure something will have happened. We'll have some notes to compare with.
Yeah, I do think this is going to be a short-lived thing.
I know. As always, we have more questions.
Yeah.
Go figure.
But yeah, it is really hard to understand. Like, what is Israel's like? I don't even know what the hell they're trying to achieve.
Yeah. What's the end game?
What's the desired end state? Yeah.
If it's not rescuing the hostages.
Yeah.
And it's not perpetual occupation.
Yeah. Like it's always, we're going to destroy Hamas. Like, really? Are you? No, I don't think you will.
Yeah. Like, is it?
I don't think that's possible.
Yeah. I mean, it seems as futile. Like, without perpetual occupation, it seems certainly as futile as the war on terror.
I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's ISIS now? Where's ISIL now? Where's Al Qaeda now? Right? They've all been replaced by other things, but those organizations are essential.
Well, and that's the other thing is that.
Yeah, but as you say, they've just been replaced by other entities.
Right.
But depending on the conflict and the problems.
Are they going to take out Hamas? Is it possible? Yes, they can take out Hamas.
But it will be replaced by something else.
What will it be replaced by?
It'll be replaced by something that's the same thing.
But I think that's where you're talking about. They need to do the hearts and minds thing. Otherwise, it's just going to
and the hearts and minds has not been very successful for them. So part of me wonders if they need to like throw a bunch of aid at the West Bank just as a reward for saying thanks for not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like just say
thanks for not being part of this.
And have this. This is the contrast.
But on the other hand, is that going to help, or is it just going to make a bunch of Fatah bureaucrats rich? Like, how do you, like, I hear what you're saying.
Well,
if you can improve the life of the average guy on the street in the West Bank in a market, like move the needle in a market way, that would be 100% effective. But you can't do that with Fatah running the show.
Don't give the money to Fatah as aid. Give it to companies like SodaStream.
Maybe.
Say, here's a bunch of money, go invest it over there. You build your company.
Yeah, and
maybe we'll cover some of your losses
if you can end run. If you can end run around Fatah, or you can get with Fatah leadership and say, okay, here's your cut.
Yeah, let us do what we got to do.
Let us do what we got to do. Here's your cut. We'll make your life easier if all your people get richer.
Yeah.
Right?
Maybe that's the way you could get de facto control of the West Bank. Just buy out Fatah.
Yeah.
Just buy out
you're not getting
about
control.
100, 120 people.
What you're doing is you're getting your Easter agreement.
Yeah, but that's what I mean is that by getting control, what I mean is you stop Fatah from interfering with it.
Yeah.
You want to do a project which ultimately raises the standard of living of the common people in the West Bank. But you need Fatah to not take step, like the political leadership, about 100 to 150 people at the top of the Fatah civil administration. You need to stop them from interfering with you, or simply confiscating the fruits of that investment through taxation, through
bribes,
regulation, this sort of thing. So you're going to have to bribe 100 to 150 people in Fatah, throw a lot of money at them, pay them enough to look the other way. Because again, they also see what you're trying to do. And most of them probably hate Israel. So you're paying them off, just making them so wealthy that they're willing to look the other way. And then, you do something to raise a tide that lifts all of the boats, and then hold that up for the Gazans to say, you could live this way too.
Yeah.
That would definitely be a long game. And I think ultimately a more successful
They
game.
have to play a long game in the end.
But in the short-term game, I think you've got an Israeli population that wants vengeance.
Mm-hmm.
They want pain and suffering inflicted upon the Gazan population.
Yeah.
And I think this is politically necessary for Netanyahu. I cannot see him surviving this politically if he takes a moderate tone.
Don't know that he's going to survive it anyway.
Discussions, Steve was saying.
I think before you got here, before we turned the mics on, is that like from what I've been hearing, again, it's all mostly Western commentators, but it's like once this all shakes out in the aftermath, everyone's fired.
Probably.
Like Netanyahu, the bulk of the government, the heads of Mossad, the heads of the military.
Yeah. How did you not see this coming?
How did you not see this coming? Everyone's fired.
Yeah, I can see that.
Anyway, so you're all...
But again, Netanyahu isn't going to just accept that fate.
True enough.
He's going to play every card he can.
And he's a survivor of anybody.
He's a survivor.
Yep, he's absolutely... he's a cockroach.
I can definitely...
In the survivor team.
Yeah, exactly. So I can see him... I can see him trying to play to that Israeli rage and anger by just inflicting mass casualty on Gaza. I can see them doing that.
So I just want to clarify, when I say BB's a cockroach, I just mean he's a survivor.
Exactly.
The way a roach survives everything. Not that he's a
cockroach.
That he's a horrible
You're not
person.
meaning as a pejorative.
Yeah. I actually heard Gene Simmons say it once. He was talking about, he was on Trump's show.
Go figure.
And he was talking about one of the other contestants, and he called her a cockroach, saying she's a cockroach. She's a survivor. Don't count her out. She'll be,
She'll be around.
She'll be around because she's a survivor.
She'll be around. Yeah. So I can see that, but I don't think destruction of Hamas is a realistic goal, and I think the Israeli leadership knows that.
Yeah.
I think all they can do is try and inflict so much suffering and punishment on Gaza that it maybe serves as a deterrent for the next 10 years from allowing their population to participate in these.
Maybe.
Well, I don't know what else they can do.
We'll see. Yeah. We'll see. I mean,
I don't see a solution to it in any way, really.
There's only so far they can go before completely outraging the Muslim world. And and again, they've
already done that,
right? Like
multiple times.
Because the European powers are going to be on them within the next couple of weeks to say you got to stop, because the European powers are worried about their Muslim immigrant populations rising up and creating all kinds of chaos in Europe.
This is my point.
And so then it's
now people are reconsidering the value of immigration. This is kind of what I was speaking of.
Wasn't it last episode we were talking about immigration's only saving grace right now?
Well, demographically,
but I didn't say it was the only saving grace. I said this is Canada's doing, mechanism. Trying to address it by immigration, but I don't think it's going to work. Like, again, I made points that our immigrants tend to be older. Mm-hmm. We don't have their primary earning years, and they tend to bring just as many dependents with them. Like, they don't. For every immigrant, you're getting 4 dependents, so that it's a net loss any way you slice it. So immigration is not going to be the solution.
And 30% of immigrants in recent years have only been staying a couple of years and then moved on.
Yeah. So that aside, the idea of open door immigration, mass immigration, is now being questioned, because now you got some European nations that are looking at it and saying now our foreign population. Or not foreign population.
Foreign-born populations.
Our foreign policy is now constricted by these foreign communities that can hold us hostage by saying you either comply in this realm or we will destabilize your cities.
Yeah.
Okay, so when that destabilization occurs and we are held hostage, talk to me.
Okay. Fair.
So let's, again.
Oh, okay. Just a thought exercise on this.
In 2 weeks, we're going to compare notes.
What do you say? Would you agree to something where we say, okay, we're going to take
Probably not.
We're going to do a register. Everybody who subscribes to the Trent School, saying, like, when this happens, call me. You put your name on a sheet of paper. They can now sue you for damages if it happens.
Oh, blah.
No, seriously. Would you sign that?
No.
Why not? You believe in it, don't you? Listen, you believe in what you're saying, right?
Life is full of risk. I step
yes, but you are imposing this risk on other people. It's not that they chose to assume that risk. You're imposing it on them.
No.
Yeah.
If I step out in the street and risk getting hit by a bus, that's not my fault. That's because some fucking clown built a transit system in my city. That's their fault. That's not on
but
me.
if people voted for the transit system and said, yeah, it's good. If people are coming up now saying, I don't know about this immigration, and then they get said, oh, you're a racist.
Listen, you know what?
And if people are saying, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, and you say, look, you shouldn't be taking this action until you have legitimate grounds for taking that action.
You know what happens in this life sometimes? Bad fucking things. You know what? You know what else?
So you're not that confident,
what else?
Is what you're saying.
There's no fucking guarantees that bad things won't happen.
You're not confident then.
You're
not confident at all.
I'm not confident that saying that stopping immigration as a result of what occurred last weekend, the conversation we just had about it, is the solution to anything.
I find that a very, very, very interesting thought exercise.
You know what? I'm not as mean as you. I could probably come up with the same thing about you signing your name to some fucking thing. You probably weasel your way out of it.
Harder to. Just because of the nature of our philosophical positions.
I don't know.
But if you do have one, bring it forward. It would be interesting.
All right.
It would be interesting.
All right. If I feel like beating my head against that brick wall, I'll let you know.
Like something where, I don't know, maybe like deregulation.
Or how about if your insistence on free speech leads to some clown saying some fucking thing that's really stupid, and
like say, calling for genocide of a given group or something like that.
Or, it's something a bit smaller than that, but it personally impacts me.
We do have legislation about that already. Like if incitement to violence. like if I say, like if I am making statements, like let's say you belong to like a given, let's say you belong to a given religious group, right? Or religious denomination. And I am making statements saying that this religious denomination is inherently negative and should be driven from our communities, and like we should not tolerate their presence. Mm-hmm. And some guy Molotov cocktails your house. And in his trial, it's seen that like a whole bunch of statements from me, like say I've been putting this on social media, like on various kind of forms. I write books, and they find 2 or 3 books by me, making these statements, right? On his bookshelf. I am absolutely open to not just civil suit, but criminal charge for incitement of violence and hatred. So that sort of thing already exists.
So aren't you talking about now? And I can't believe I've been trying to shut this conversation down for like 20 minutes now.
And now you're in it.
Okay, I'm gonna say something. We're gonna leave it at that.
Okay.
You're demanding the last word?
Yeah, I make no guarantees, but anyway.
So
proceed at your own risk,
sir. What you just talked about. Remember we were talking about, I was pointing out examples of what some of the protesters, the trucker protesters did. And you said, well, you're only talking about 20, 25 people.
Tiny minority. So, and you're trying to transpose that across the entire, across the entire protest.
So let me finish my thought.
Okay.
So the head of the trucker protest, or the heads of it, who were giving out the messaging and organizing all this, right, have somehow their messaging attracted and influenced these 20 to 25 people who did these ugly things. Mm-hmm. How is that not incitement?
Because it comes to the reasonable man standard. And this is also already well established within the common law. Okay. Would a reasonable person draw that same conclusion? And that's up for a jury to decide. The Crown must make the argument successfully that a reasonable person would draw those same conclusions.
All right.
If we say, look, this guy's...
No, it's okay. We don't need to... We can parse it out next time.
Okay. But yeah, that standard already exists.
All right.
And it's what we call like the reasonable man. But I guess in modern parlance, it would be the reasonable person standard.
Okay.
And the Crown does, from time to time, bring forth those prosecutions. When obviously, first litmus test, it feels, can it win? The Crown is not going to enter into a prosecution simply for the sake of trying to raise awareness of it. Yeah. Like you could see that, like I could see how the Crown would say, look, we're not going to win this case because we're not going to convince anybody. A good lawyer is going to take us apart on this, but we want to raise awareness on it. Like maybe we want to nip this in the bud and create a deterrent effect by say, hey, you who's maybe consuming this stuff on socials, maybe you who's thinking that you might subscribe to this, just know you might find yourself in the docket for spreading this kind of incitement or hatred or what have you. I would do something like that. But by and large, it seems the policy of our Ministry of Justice is not to pursue prosecutions for the sake of public opinion. They don't seem to do that. But that said, they do take action and they do bring charges where they feel they can get a conviction.
All right, then. Well, let's leave it at that. We've been all over the map. Rhetorically and actually.
Geographically.
Yeah, geographically.
All right, everybody. As always, comments, questions, concerns to complicatedpod@gmail.com. Please. We'll look at that after.
Do we have any? No, I want to say welcome to our listeners if we had any new ones.
Oh, we don't have any new ones.
No,
we don't have any listeners.
Audience rankings.
I guarantee it. We don't have any listeners. It's just people who clicked on 30 seconds and said this is stupid.
Okay. Clicked off. All right.
Still the same spread. So please like and share and subscribe and tell your friends about us if you actually like us, because there seems to be 9 or 10 of you who listen to us every episode. So if you told 2 friends and you told 2 friends,
I think they're probably only tuning in to see if we are as stupid as we were last time.
That could be. But hey, if it keeps them coming back, I don't care.
It keeps them coming back.
Thanks, everybody.